that an NHS website could appear to compare the first cousin marriage with white British women having babies over the age of 34, as if they're the same risk factor, as if they're the same sort of cultural choice.
Yeah, I think the NHS website was trying to compare perhaps two different cultures of what the Pakistani community predominantly perhaps sometimes does in Bradford and what white British women tend to do, having babies a little bit later on due to getting on a career or something like that.
That's what they said, isn't it?
Yeah,
they said because they might choose to put their career first, or this liberalism.
Yeah, and
liberalism.
And the NHS website was suggesting that perhaps that could create a higher danger of having an abnormality with a baby because you are having a baby later. But it's difficult because the statistics don't lie. I think it was about 30% perhaps of birth defects from babies born within a first cousin marriage have defects, whereas 19% of white British women having babies over the age of 34 have a birth defect. So there is a bit of
No, that's only 19% of babies that were born with defects were from women who were over the age of 34, which is very different, very different. But can you believe that our NHS is advertising jobs specifically for nurses to deal with the issue of first cousin marriage? It's quite something. We're going to get deep into this issue because, yes, as you can see, it angers me quite a lot, that framing of it anyway. But gbnews.com/you'll say, I mean, Keir Starmer as well, saying that building houses is more important than nature. That's a punchy one. What do you make of that? Get in touch. It's your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says questions need to be answered over the awful case of 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her father and stepmother, describing the details as shocking. After years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. Yesterday, Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were found guilty of her murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, who lived with them, was convicted of causing or allowing her death. The Prime Minister has today said that there needs to be safeguards for children, especially those being homeschooled like Sara. Elsewhere, the number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 70% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warned of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. NHS leaders are warning that hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. An average of 1,861 patients with flu were in hospital every day last week, up from 1,099 in the previous week and 3.5 times higher than the same time last year. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has urged people eligible for free vaccinations on the NHS to take them before it's too late. The government is today demanding immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of its plans to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer's vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. The new plans could mean increased developments on the green belts, so the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. Although the plans have been met with criticism, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner sees it as a landmark overhaul. However, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Kevin Hollenrake says Labour's housing plans would amount to bulldozing greenbelt sites.
What I'm concerned about with these rules is that they're really going to drive a coach and horses, a bulldozer if you like, through local concerns about where they're going to be built and how they're going to be built. You know, 1.5 million homes, but lots of those homes are going to be built in greenbelt, in rural areas. Targets in London will be reduced. Targets in most of the big rural areas across the country will be doubled. So it's really where they're going to be built is the concern, and the thing is people's concerns are going to be completely swept aside by Angela Rayner in this headlong rush to build more homes when we've already got lots of planning consents around the country.
Housing and Planning Minister Matthew Pennycook says the government are committed to boosting economic growth, and he's also rejected calls that the government are bypassing local communities.
We want local communities involved early on with the production of local plans, because local development plans are the best way for individual communities to shape development in their areas and to come to a view as to how housing should be developed and where it should go. But it does have to be a conversation about how and where it goes rather than whether it happens at all. And that's because we've got an acute and entrenched housing crisis in England. And you will all know, your viewers will know, what that crisis means for people out there. It means 1.3 million people languishing on social housing waiting lists. It means a generation locked out of home ownership.
A man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years, the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. The 31-year-old initially denied violent disorder and arson with intent to endanger life, but later pleaded guilty to the charges. Jailing him, Judge Jeremy Richardson KC said this is one of the worst cases of its kind stemming from the Rotherham disorder. Fishlock's sentence, which also includes a 5-year licence period after he's released from jail, is the same as that of Thomas Burley, who was also part of the mob, some of whom attempted to torch the hotel in South Yorkshire. In other news, the backlog of criminal cases waiting to be dealt with by Crown courts in England and Wales hit a new record high of 73,105 in September. That's according to new figures shown by the Ministry of Justice. The government's considering fundamental reform in the courts after the Crown Court backlog almost doubled in 5 years. The caseload increased 3% on the previous quarter and 10% on the previous year. Those latest figures prompted the government to announce it has drafted in retired Judge Sir Brian Leveson to carry out a major review of the court system. Leveson, former president of the Queen's Bench Division, will explore options to speed up justice for victims and keep streets safe. However, the options mentioned in today's announcement from the Ministry of Justice would lead to fewer jury trials. And drivers planning Christmas getaways are being warned to expect long queues because of record traffic levels. The AA predicted that Friday, the 20th of December, will be the busiest day on the roads during the festive period, with an estimated 23.7 million drivers planning a trip. That's more than the busiest Christmas getaway day of any year since the AA began recording their data in 2010. The joint second worst days for traffic jams over the 2024 festive period are expected to be the 21st and the 23rd, each with 22.7 million drivers expected to be on the roads. Amber traffic warnings have been issued by the AA for all 3 days. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more from me in half an hour.
OK, welcome back. It's now 9 minutes past 12. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, could teachers and social care services have done more to protect Sara Sharif from the abuse she received?
Yeah, that's after years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse. 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. But questions are now being asked if cultural sensitivities meant teachers were too afraid to question why Sara Sharif started wearing a hijab in school.
Yes, so the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, reacted to the jury's decision. This is what he said.
This is just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who'll be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children. So it's just the most awful case that many people, many viewers will find very, very, very hard to hear.
Well, there you go. That's what the Prime Minister had to say on the case. But we have Charlie Peters here in the studio to discuss this further. Now, Charlie, you were following this horrific story and this court case for a long time. 3 people have been sentenced now as a result. But questions raised over how on earth this could have happened, particularly over potentially cultural sensitivities playing a part.
Right. So now that the trial is concluded and we have these convictions, there is so much more detail that we can now finally reveal after lots of applications from the media to release some more of the information about the procedures, more information about Irfan Sharif's background, the father and now murderer of Sara Sharif, including the fact that he was a notorious manipulator of women, particularly vulnerable Polish women who he targeted looking for a way to stay in Britain. He was a Pakistani man on a student visa into Britain. There's one story which has come out today in the newspapers about him targeting a 17-year-old girl when he was working at Burger King and starting a relationship with her because he thought that would be a way he could stay in the country. Despite all of this, he was able to keep custody of Sara and other children, despite many reports and several arrests of Irfan Sharif over reports of domestic violence, both towards his children, but also previous partners. All that information now finally in the public domain after this conviction. But you go to those cultural sensitivities, and that very key point, I think, being raised now by Will Forster, the new Woking MP, is a Liberal Democrat elected in July. He wants that to be central to the questions being asked by a safeguarding review team and an inquest into Sara's death, because he's concerned, as many are, that cultural sensitivities, perhaps fears of being seen as racist or prying too much into an Islamic household, could have prevented safeguarding teams, social services, the police, teachers, neighbours, anyone who had eyes or ears who were open to this abuse from doing the right thing, because they feared potentially being seen as racist or Islamophobic. That's very much a concern. I think that's alive at the moment, and key to that is the hijab. Now, Sara started wearing a hijab in the year before her death. She died and was killed in August of last year. She was first seen wearing it, I think, around January. A neighbour said during the trial that she'd spoken to the parents and said, I've just noticed that your daughter has started wearing the hijab. You're the only member of the family to do so. And they said that the conversation was very swiftly shut down. We now know that she was used and forced to wear the hijab to cover up injuries to her face and neck. Teachers were previously aware of injuries to her face and neck, and they didn't raise concerns about the hijab once they saw them continually appearing on her chin, for example.
The thing is, Charlie, you speak of cultural sensitivities and this horrific case, but we've heard this before, haven't we? I'm thinking back to the grooming gangs scandal, for example. Again, reports suggested that cultural sensitivities were perhaps a reason, suggesting it was a reason why those in power did not speak up.
And I think also of the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, where a security guard did not want to stop that bomber because he didn't want to stop a man of an ethnic minority background who looks suspicious. There are so many other examples of this happening. And I think it was widespread in Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, for example, all those towns where child sexual exploitation occurred. And when you think about what's happening now in 2023, when this investigation was taking place and people were looking into working out what had happened to Sara Sharif, has that culture improved or worsened of people being nervous about asking questions for fear of retribution? Now, I think we can say quite confidently that our culture has become more punitive, more censorious, more careful, and well, this MP, the Lib Dem, wants to see if that affected Sara Sharif's safety. And just very quickly, I just want to say, yesterday, when this guilty verdict came in, Surrey Police issued a very extensive press release. The only photo that they attached of Sara Sharif in that press release was her wearing a hijab. Now, this stunned me when I received it about 3:30 yesterday afternoon, because essentially, in the press release that the police force have put out to celebrate these convictions and to get some justice finally for Sara, they've included a photo of her wearing a tool of her abuse. They know, as we do, as the court heard, as the jury saw and heard, that Sara was forced to wear that head covering to cover up the campaign of appalling abuse she suffered. Over 100 internal and external injuries. Some of the evidence I heard from forensic pathologists across a whole week of evidence, we can't even discuss. It's so horrific. Surrey Police chose to illustrate that press release with a photo of her wearing yet more evidence and a sign of her being abused. There's plenty of footage we played out yesterday, for example, of Sara Sharif not wearing that headscarf. And I've asked Surrey Police for an explanation about that. I hope to bring that later in the programme.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question to ask. That is a fair question to ask. If the only reason she was wearing that hijab was because of the abuse and how the perpetrators wanted to, well, her family wanted to hide it. But, I mean, if it is the case, if we do find out that if this girl had been a little white girl, that perhaps this wouldn't have been allowed to happen, the authorities would have done something sooner, the teachers would have raised alarms sooner, things would have happened, then that is an absolute scandal. Thank you so much, Charlie Peters, our national reporter. A very depressing story, but these questions need to be asked.
Yeah, and we'll have more on that later on in the programme. Now, Angela Rayner has been accused of looking to bulldoze through the home counties as the Deputy Prime Minister prepares to unveil the biggest overhaul of planning rules in a generation to meet the government's house building targets.
Yes, so her plans are expected to include expanding the definition of low-quality green belt, so homes can be built on previously protected land. OK, so here's what Angela Rayner had to say about her planned reforms.
Oh, we do not have that. But the Prime Minister has been visiting a housing construction site in Huntington today. Hopefully we can hear what the Prime Minister is saying about all this.
Well, the starting point is local plans, and that's really important for councils to develop the plan according to the target, taking into account local need and working with developers. So that's where it starts. But are we going to push it through if those plans don't work? Yes, we absolutely are. Are we going to push away the planning rules and make them clearer, as we've done today? Get away the blockers that are stopping the housing being built? Yes, we absolutely intend. For years, we've had not enough houses being built. That means that individuals and families don't have the security that they want. We're determined to break through that, to do what's necessary. Of course, we want to get the balance right with nature and the environment. But, you know, if it comes to a human being wanting to have a house for them and their family, that has to be the top priority.
Well, joining us now is GBNews political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, welcome to the desk. Clearly, there is a huge issue with a housing crisis here in the UK. Over 100,000 children in temporary accommodation, for example. But a lot of people are not going to want big housing estates built in their back gardens. Where's the balance? It's a difficult balance, isn't it, for the government?
It really is. And this is quite a big moment because this pledge of 1.5 million homes Get Britain Building was one of the Labour Party's main election pledges, if you like. It's going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. The previous government had a target of 300,000 a year, which I don't think that they ever met. And the Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, on a new housing estate in Cambridgeshire this morning, meeting a family that had just got their first home, and the Prime Minister saying how he wants this for so many more people. Now, they're saying brownfield sites will be given approval, and then in terms of building on the green belt, they're looking to identify bits of that, of what they'll call grey belt, places like old car parks or petrol stations or bits of scrubland that are not particularly green, that they think could well be used. And they're saying they want councils to galvanise this building themselves, but they are saying that if councils are intransigent and do not go along with the targets, that they have the right to intervene. And on environmental concerns, the government's own impact assessment has made it clear that there will be a negative environmental impact. Now, one of the other of the Labour's big pledges was, you know, the environment, etc. So I think that might set up a bit of a battle, but the Prime Minister made it clear that if it was choosing homes for families over protecting the environment in terms of building, that they're going to go for building houses.
It's controversial, isn't it, from Keir Starmer to essentially say, yeah, homes more important than nature. Lots of people will disagree with that, despite the need for housing. Also contentious is the issue of immigration when it comes to housing. I'm just reading here that the Shadow Housing Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, has made this point today in the discussion over this, that most of these housing could well be going to newly arrived immigrants because of the numbers.
I just watched that in the Commons because, of course, we know that about 750,000 more people came than left last year. They all need to live somewhere. So, yes, Kevin Hollinrake, the Shadow Housing Minister, in the Commons just in the last few minutes, asked what percentage of these houses being built would be for immigrant households. And the answer came back from the Housing Secretary. He said that the majority of homes sold by developers are sold to British nationals, and the strict requirements about residency. He accused the shadow housing minister of scaremongering and said it was beneath him. But whether these 1.5 million homes go to British nationals or not, the fact remains that 750,000 more people in the country all need somewhere to live.
Yeah, it's mathematics, isn't it? And Angela Rayner did struggle on this one. Was it on Sunday when she was doing the media round? That question of how many of these new homes are going to go to new immigrants and what's the balance of that? It's a difficult one. We all know we need more housing, though. That is true. That is true. But at the cost of our nature? I don't know. We've got a poll running today, haven't we?
We certainly
Thank you,
do.
Catherine.
Thank you, the jury's out on that one. So yes, we are running our poll of the day. So on the government's house building plans, we are asking, do you support Angela Rayner's Green Belt development plan to build 1.5 million homes? And we'll be bringing you those results live throughout the day, so make sure you keep tuning in.
I wouldn't mind so much if they were all beautiful homes, you know, lovely architecture
Define
like we used to make.
home.
Like we used to make in this country. You know, the beautiful mansion blocks, the lovely, pretty terraced houses instead of these, I don't know, glass metal monstrosities.
The thing is, if you build up, you can get more people in. It's a really tricky balance. There's so much demand for housing, it pushes the prices up. And the other point is, you need to build housing where people actually want it, the outskirts of cities, where the jobs are, where the infrastructure is.
Absolutely. You can't just plonk some housing in the middle of the nowhere and hope that people will make it there. And also, of course, we need doctors, we need roads, we need trains, we need buses, we need absolutely everything that goes with more housing. Anyway, the final result on that poll will be announced later in Martin Daubney's show.
And for all our latest polls and news and how to vote, go to gbnews.com/poll.
OK, well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up, including one NHS trust has actually compared having children over the age of 34 to cousin marriages. We'll reveal more next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
The birth rate in Britain has sunk to 1.49, well below replacement rate. Yet policies pursued by both major parties are still to spend huge sums to encourage parents back to their work when their children are still at preschool age. Should we not be helping parents to spend longer at home, asks his new book, whilst recognising that in an age of sex equality, the question is fraught. David Goodhart joins me now.
We undervalue the domestic realm, and that has led to lots of the most negative trends in British society. About half of children in the UK are not living with both of their biological parents by the age of 14. We have, of families with dependent children, about 24-25% are single-parent households. You know, mainly mothers, and they're doing, valiant work. But of course, it means you don't have the investment in children that a two-parent family can give. I mean, the reason why it's a care dilemma is that a lot of these negative trends are also kind of intimately related to positive things, like that movement of women into work, the fact that women are no longer so defined by marriage and motherhood, the fact that women and men are freer to leave unhappy relationships. And the challenge for modern liberal societies is, how we hold on to those freedoms but get a better balance, which means, I think, investing more in the domestic realm. We spend a total now of £9 billion on childcare subsidies. Why not give that subsidy direct to young parents so they could then choose whether to subsidise themselves, as it were, to be able to afford to stay at home, or to give it to a nursery, or to give it to granny, or to keep it in the home.
GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
OK, welcome back. It's 12:26. Now, material drawn up by health chiefs in Bradford describe cousin marriages as a cultural practice, and they liken it to white women choosing to start families later on in life, past the age of 34.
Meanwhile, the NHS has also been advertising for midwives who specialise in inbred babies. And this all comes after Tory chair Richard Holden calls for first cousin marriage to be banned due to health concerns. OK, well, joining us now is human rights lawyer Dr. Shoaib Khan. Shoaib, thank you very much for coming on to discuss this. You would have seen that this has been discussed in Parliament. There was one MP, an independent MP, who did stand up and he said that there were health concerns, of course, to first cousin marriage, but he did defend the right of people to marry their cousin and to have offspring. Where do you stand on this? Because I read what's been written on this NHS website and I was quite alarmed to see that this NHS trust had likened white British women having a child over the age of 34 with first cousin marriage and the potential health issues that come from that. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we just have to, obviously, there's different ways of looking at it. What are we considering? If we're talking about the health of the children, then I think, I mean, again, I don't think anyone is attacking the intent behind this report or the integrity or the factual findings. So I think if that's what they're saying, that, you know, within some communities there are cousin marriages, that leads to poor health or disabilities or birth defects, as I think the term that they used. And the same is happening when people women over 34 are having children, and it's the same thing, and those children are not perfectly healthy either. And if their findings are that it's mostly white women, then I think, of course, it's good to, you know, especially they're an NHS trust. I mean, I don't think anyone expected them to, you know, have any sociological or anthropological...
Sure, but it's not the same risk, though, is it? It's not the same risk. If someone has a child at age 34, that is not the same as the risk of having a child from a first cousin marriage. This Born in Bradford study found that cousin marriage accounts for 30% of birth defects. That is not the same as having a child as a white British woman or whatever colour over the age of 34. There's different risk factors here, and people find it insulting that it might compare the two, you know?
No, I don't see why that's insulting. The point is, yes, I mean, it's just like saying, you know, there's a report that comes out about public health and it talks about smokers and it talks about obese people. And then you say, well, the risks aren't the same. One has a higher risk. So I don't think that you know, the smokers have to concentrate on the smoking. The obese people have to focus on losing weight. I don't see why that's something to be offensive or defensive about. I mean, why is that offensive? The point is, yes, there might be varying risk levels, but the point is that is harming our society, harming the NHS as well, and that is harming our society and community and NHS as well. So, but I mean, having said that, if what we think is in terms of we're looking at from a values point of view or a morality point of view, then again, some might actually find that, you know, why are women, I don't know, prioritizing their jobs? Why are women looking at other things? You know, why are they going at, you know, men can't go out and have babies, so why are women doing this?
Oh,
some others find that much more abhorrent than, you know, it's, you know, unheard of once, but, you know, how can two cousins actually get married? So, I mean, I think that's just a matter of, you know, relative, someone's values and morality. So, but that's the thing. I mean, are we looking at this from a purely a health point of view? In which case, of course, a health report and NHS trust should have mentioned both things. I just don't see what that is to be defensive about.
You speak of cultural practices. A study published last year found that the number of people in Bradford's Pakistani community, for example, who married a cousin fell sharply in the past 10 years. And the study suggests that it's higher educational attainment, new family dynamics, for example, and changes in immigration rules. So do you think there is a cultural shift? Maybe less people are marrying their cousins?
Again, I mean, I wouldn't know, but I mean, if that's what the study said, then of course, I mean, I think generally, of course, that is what integration is, isn't it? That is what learning from each other's cultures is all about. That's what, you know, being part of the community that you move into is. So, of course, I mean, those changes are happening. So I mean, I'm sure. I mean, that's
so you think that the British culture needs to learn from Pakistani culture when it comes to first cousin marriage? Is that what you're saying? That it needs to both?
No, generally, what I was saying that obviously, like has been said, that cousin marriages in those communities are decreasing. So I'm saying that they've learned from the community that's the point I was making. But I'm sure, I mean, of course, I'm not going to deny that it is a two-way street. Of course, there is lots, and I think, we need to come out of this sort of petty or small-minded or whatever the term is, saying that, we're a perfect culture and anyone else who comes in must learn only from us. So, of course, there's a lot of things that other cultures, other traditions, we can learn from as well. So, of course, it is a two-way street. But in this case, what we've seen is, of course, that those people are integrating and those people are not, engaging in first cousin marriage as much as they used to.
Yeah, it's true. The rate has gone down, which can only be a good thing when it comes to health defects and the like. Dr. Shoaib Khan, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time on this, human rights lawyer. Good stuff. Yes, it's quite interesting what they say on that NHS website, though. We had it up on the screen, but for those listening on radio, saying that it's important to mention that just like cousin marriage is a cultural practice in Asian, British, Pakistani heritage, resulting in increasing risk factors for congenital anomalies, so too is choosing to give birth or after the age 34 in white British women couples. It's largely a result of choosing lifestyles embedded in liberal values, such as preferring jobs. And
this was material drawn up by Bradford health chiefs back in 2022, which is still, we believe, on the website.
I mean, it's true that a lot of white British women are having children later, and there are some risks to that. But I'm not sure it's a cultural practice in the same way as a first cousin marriage is, and I'm not sure, although I stand to be corrected, whether it carries the same risks for health abnormalities and the like. But there you go. Please get in touch if you have another view on that one.
Well, so this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show, including the government bans puberty blockers indefinitely for under 18s, claiming the drugs are a risk to children's health. Was this the right decision? That's next.
Good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says questions need to be answered over the awful case of 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her father and stepmother, describing the details as shocking. After years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. Yesterday, Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were found guilty of her murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, who lived with them, was also convicted of causing or allowing her death. The Prime Minister has said today there need to be safeguards for children, especially those being homeschooled like Sara.
This is just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who'll be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children. It's just the most awful case that many people, many viewers will find very, very, very hard to hear.
In other news, the number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 70% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warned of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. NHS leaders are warning that hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. An average of 1,861 patients with flu were in hospital every day last week, up from 1,099 in the previous week, and 3.5 times higher than the same time last year. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has urged people eligible for free vaccinations on the NHS to take them before it's too late. And the government is today demanding immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of its plans to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer is vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. The new plans could mean increased developments on the Green Belt, though the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. Although the plans have been met with criticism, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner sees it as a landmark overhaul. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome along to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's grey and misty out there for most of us, damp for some as well, but still some brightness to be had, mostly across parts of Scotland where high pressure is sitting. That high pressure has led to frost and fog in parts of Scotland, but for many away from the foggier areas there is some brightness, particularly north of the central belt inland. Otherwise, much of the UK, cloudy skies, and that cloud is lowered across parts of East Wales, the Midlands, eastern England, and that low cloud is bringing outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Otherwise, temperatures of 8 or 9 Celsius in the south. It's not going to feel very pleasant with the grey, misty skies, but colder than that across parts of Scotland after a frosty start. We keep the grey skies into the evening across most of England and Wales. Some cloud breaks for West Wales into western parts of Northern Ireland, for example, but the most extensive cloud breaks will always be through the Highlands and Grampians, Caithness, Sutherland, where, again, temperatures will fall under those clear skies overnight. So frosty conditions and temperatures as low as -8, -9 Celsius in sheltered parts. However, the gap in the cloud across parts of Scotland is being nibbled away from all angles. We've got cloud approaching from the south overnight. We've got cloud approaching from the northwest as well, and that's going to bring outbreaks of rain in. But we start off Friday with a touch of frost in the far northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, another grey start, a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog, and patchy drizzle. The drizzle most likely across southern parts of England and Wales into western and northwestern Scotland, as well as the east coast. And all in all, it's, although technically mild, it's not going to feel very pleasant under the grey skies, turning even milder through the weekend.
The latest GB News travel.
The southbound side of the A1M is partially blocked, causing slow traffic to an accident at junction 36 for Doncaster. Coastbound on the M26, there is a closure and long delays to a lorry fire from the M25 to junction 2A for the A20. Delays are past Clackett Lane services on the M25. The M25 clockwise accident has cleared though from Potters Bar through to junction 10 for Enfield. London bound for the M4 around Wiltshire, there is a closure due to a spillage from junction 15 for Swindon East to Hungerford at 14. Delays are on the M4 for 40 minutes and 30 minutes for Marlborough as traffic diverts. Southbound on the M5, a lane closure on the exit slip road continues at Weston-super-Mare junction 21. And that's your very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. The time is 12:39. Now, the government has announced an indefinite ban on puberty blockers for under 18s suffering from gender dysphoria.
OK, well, justifying the ban, the Department of Health and Social Care said the puberty blockers pose an unacceptable safety risk to young people.
Well, here's what the Health Secretary Wes Streeting told the House of Commons when speaking about the ban yesterday.
I know it's not easy being a trans kid in our country today. The trans community is at the wrong end of all of the statistics for mental ill health, self-harm and suicide. I can't pretend to know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to feel you have to bury a secret about yourself, to be afraid of who you are, to be bullied for it, and then to experience the liberating experience of coming out.
OK, so Wes taken the controversial decision to ban these puberty blockers. Should we get the thoughts of transsexual and human rights activist Miranda Yardley? Miranda, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us on the show today. What do you make of this? Is this the right decision from Wes Streeting to just ban these puberty blockers for under 18s, at least for the meantime?
Oh, absolutely. It's the exactly right thing to do. I was a bit unhappy at some of the rhetoric that he used within his address that you've just shown there. I mean, he refers to the idea of a trans kid, which is similar to a vegan cat, something that doesn't really exist except in the construct of adults. And as usual, this whole idea about trans people committing suicide and this very much blackmail-focused approach of saying, well, you either give the children this or you give the adults this or they will kill themselves. It's blackmail. And like so many things to do with what is being called gender-affirming care, it has absolutely no evidence to back it up, and whatever evidence that does exist does actually show that the people making these claims are wrong. So yeah, I completely agree with Wes Streeting on this. I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm very glad that it's happened. I think that we have to be very cautious and ensure that the lobbying doesn't refocus on to minors and young people being given cross-sex hormones.
Miranda, do you think there is too much politics involved in all of this, and young trans people appear to be kind of caught in the crossfire a little bit on this issue, don't they? For example, the Green MP, Sian Berry, has said she was extremely worried and fearful about the decision, describing it as discriminatory. Labour's Alex Sobel suggests it was an attack on trans young people. It's almost kind of making them the victim in a sense.
Well, what overwrought statements they were by people who should frankly know better. Like I said, the concept of a trans child, nobody is born into the wrong body. The idea of the trans child is entirely a construct of adults that is used to justify their own decisions that they've made as adults. And so many of the adults who are making these, who are speaking out against what Wes Streeting is doing and who are advocating for children to be given cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, so many of them are denying these children the lives of which they've already enjoyed and benefited from. So no, I don't follow those statements, and the Green Party has been absolutely terrible on this matter and so many other issues as well. For example, basic ideas about safeguarding, in that they've allowed adults to freely mingle with, freely influence children within their party activities without having any form of adequate safeguarding protections. I think that the Green Party is a undemocratic, unscientific organisation that is run by zealots, and the sooner that party reinvents itself as something that's informed by reality, the better.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that they're so at odds with the Labour Party on this one now, with Wes Streeting heading up health. But this is temporary, this ban, potentially. It's going to be reviewed once they've got more evidence, apparently. Do you worry that this won't make the difference you hope it might? For example, children may still be able to get this treatment from private services, or perhaps they'll cross the border to Scotland, where I think they're still able to get puberty blockers.
Interesting question. There's always a danger, I think, that people will attempt to circumvent the rules that we have. I believe that I think it's called the Medicines Act. I think that actually does have some teeth. So anybody using these drugs, that when they're not when they're not supposed to be used for these purposes, is, I think, running the risk of quite serious legal problems themselves. I think the situation in Scotland is coming under review. I know that there is significant resistance there. For example, for Women Scotland, amongst other campaigning activity they do, which I think is very worthwhile, have been attempting to address this and deal with the issues that the Green Party, the Scottish Green Alliance with the SNP, has brought to the table. In fact, the behaviour of the SNP and the Scottish Greens seems to have, as near as damn it, sunk the SNP.
Yeah, and the Health and Social Care Department. Yeah, and the Health and Social Care Department says the decision was taken in consultation with the Scottish and Welsh governments and in agreement with the Northern Irish governments. But Miranda, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining us, Miranda Yardley there.
Yes, and we will say that if you are going through a tough time and need someone to talk to, you can call Samaritans at any time on 116 123. So there you go.
This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more still to come even. Should the government introduce a fat tax to prevent Brits from reaching for the junk food? More on that in just a moment.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The BBC has been branded jaw-achingly stupid, not by me, by the way, over its decision to cast black and ethnic minority actors in the historical drama of Wharf Hall. Now, is this a forward-thinking idea or nonsense? Are we rewriting history? Henry, I mean, the Tudors were real-life people. They were pretty much white.
Well, some of these shows depart so much from historical context anyway that maybe it doesn't make any difference. But I think just generally we've got a problem in this country with portraying history in its correct sense. You can't change history. And I think it's about the motivation. If the motivation is to sort of to some sort of, you know, to make a political point, then I think it's wrong.
What I find kind of tedious about people finding this instant jaw-droppingly stupid, Jesus was portrayed by somebody who's half Slovak and half Irish. Moses was portrayed in the Exodus by an Englishman. So, you know, same with Anne Boleyn, you know, was portrayed by Natalie Portman, who is Jewish. So if this is the one thing that's getting people angry, then there's something deeper within that rage, because I think Hollywood's been doing that, where people...
When you say something deeper, do you think there is a hidden racism and people are complaining about this?
Well, I think for some, maybe yes. I can't speak for everybody because this news dropped today. I don't know why they are thinking that it's egregious, but there absolutely must be some underlying racism if this is the only one that you're upset about.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Good Afternoon Britain. It's 12:49 now. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a little bit of a political fight, a battle going on between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer, and it's not to be the next Prime Minister. It's over lunch.
Yes, and whether lunch is important or not. So with Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, she's spoken in today's Spectator, and she says, "What's a lunch break? Lunch is for wimps. I have food brought in, and I work and eat at the same time. There's no time. Sometimes I will get a steak. I'm not a sandwich person. I don't think sandwiches are real food. It's what you have for breakfast. I will not touch bread if it's moist." But the Prime Minister's spokesperson has hit back this, I was about to say this lunchtime, which defeats the point.
Clearly, they felt like this was a good one to win a political point on, because the official spokesperson for Sir Keir Starmer has said that he's surprised the leader of the opposition, i.e. Kemi, has a steak brought in for lunch. His favourite is a tuna sandwich and occasionally a cheese toastie. Sandwiches, he says, are a great British institution. So I can see here that Sir Keir Starmer is trying to score patriotic points on this question of sandwiches. How dare Kemi Badenoch, be so rude about the British institution of Asani?
I think it depends what job you have, to be honest, because I think there are some jobs where you can just eat at your desk if you don't have time. I unfortunately have to do so frequently. Others, you can't because you're working in a factory or in a shop or something and you have dedicated breaks in order to eat. And I thought I was one of those people that absolutely needed lunch every day, otherwise I get very hungry and very cranky. But then I was asked to present Good Afternoon Britain with the lovely Emily sat here, which of course is over lunchtime. So I have to have a very late breakfast.
Well, it is.
And then
You've got to
a
develop the habit
little
of
cereal bar that we've got here.
That's very sad. That's a very sad little healthy cereal bar, isn't it? I've learned that you have to have brunch in order to do Good Afternoon Britain. A light lunch at about 11 o'clock. Not really lunch, not really breakfast, but just something to get you through till 3 o'clock.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like some of the other presenters, you could have a snack in the studio.
I would love to know what you at home are doing right now. Are you having lunch watching us? Send us some pictures at gbnews.com/yoursay. And of course, maybe it's close to Christmas as well. So maybe it's an early Christmas lunch you're going to be having on a Thursday.
It could be an early Christmas lunch. Lots of you have been getting in touch about all sorts, really. Noel says, thank goodness puberty blockers have been banned. Let's hope a lot of our new Labour MPs will now reach it. What do you mean by that? Puberty? They'll reach puberty, is that what you're saying, Noel? Shane also says it's a good news that Labour's banned these puberty blockers and all of that. It does seem like a lot of people are happy about that change. Whether it will last, though,
Yeah.
last, that's the issue.
I know. Well, it's only until 2027, and then, of course, there's a whole consultation about it going on. But on a Christmas theme, let's completely gear change now. During Advent, as we count down to Christmas Day here on GB News, we're hearing from church ministers across the country, and each day they have a special message for you to celebrate this festive season.
The GB News Advent Calendar. Day 12.
Hello, my name is Marjorie and I'm a minister in the north of England. Advent is a season of hopeful waiting, anticipation and preparation. I wonder what you are hoping for this Christmas. As we watch the news across our world, it can be hard not to feel hopeless. Who can fix the state of our world today? Hundreds of years beforehand, speaking of the birth of Jesus Christ, the prophet Isaiah said this: "He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all of their faces." We live this side of history with the incredible reality of the fulfillment of this prophecy in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. If Advent is about looking back with wonder, it is also about looking forward to the return of Jesus Christ. And so we continue to wait. And we are all too aware that this will be the prayer of many people. There is sickness and suffering and sadness, that one day He will wipe every tear from their face. But at this Advent time, we know the end of the story. The message of Jesus Christ is just this, that He is strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow.
Well, there you go. If you want to see more of those, you can go to gbnews.com/Advent. I hope you're feeling festive at home. I'm starting to. The Christmas trees in the studio do help.
We do. Hope you can take a wide shot of that. And GB News Christmas baubles, of course. We've got to have that on our Christmas tree.
Yes, stay with us because we're going to be checking in with Christopher Hope to see exactly how much this row has developed on the old sandwiches and lunch and everything else. But first, it's your weather.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update for GB News from the Met Office. Some sunshine out there today, mostly across central parts of Scotland. Generally cloudy elsewhere with a lot of low cloud, mist and drizzle that's trapped under this area of high pressure and particularly affecting parts of central and eastern UK, with the low cloud having arrived from the North Sea and producing some spells of light rain and drizzle for East Wales, parts of the Midlands, East Anglia, the South East, as well as Northern England. Some drizzle as well for western and northwestern Scotland, but we cling on to some clear spells overnight in the northeast of Scotland, where there will be a touch of frost, but under the blanket of cloud elsewhere, it's going to stay frost-free. We start off Friday with that extensive low cloud across virtually the whole of the country, just some gaps in it across parts of northwest and northeast Scotland. Otherwise, outbreaks of rain increasingly affecting western Scotland, northwest England, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, but some clear spells there for Northern Ireland. England and Wales, mostly, again, a lot of low cloud, mistiness, hill fog about first thing, so a gloomy start. But temperatures around the mid-single figures, so not a particularly frosty start to the day. As we go through the day, little change, although it will turn wetter and windier in the far northwest of Scotland as well as the Northern Isles, and there'll be some light rain across some western coasts, although the rain in the east will tend to ease away. It's a grey day for many places, highs of 5 to 8 Celsius. Now into Friday night, this area of rain will push southeastwards across Scotland, fizzling out and turning more showery as it moves into Northern Ireland and reaches Northern England later on. That's going to clear south, and through the weekend, a change to more changeable weather, wettest in the north, but milder everywhere.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
British 10-year-old has beaten Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein in an IQ test, would you believe? Genius Krish Arora got the maximum score of 162, which puts him in the top 1% globally.
Goodness me. Well, Krish's parents noticed his brilliant potential after learning he could read fluently by the age of 4.
Krish, how does it feel to be a child genius?
I feel really happy and privileged.
Aww. Do you see it as a gift that you have?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just wonderful. Nichelle, what do you make of your child being a genius? When did it become apparent to you that Krish had something different, something special?
I think at the age of 4, he was doing things that were way beyond and above his age.
Yeah.
He could read fluently, and he could spell correctly, and he was doing complex decimal divisions. So we thought that he's on to something. I think there's a spark out here.
Wow. And how were you reading books, Krish? Did you just pick them up from your mum and dad's bookshelf and just start reading to yourself?
We used to go to the library and we got books.
Such a good tip. Such a good tip as parents.
Yeah.
Head to the library, take your kids to the library.
So, Nichelle, can Krish just do it all? Is he just an all-rounder genius? Every subject, every talent, he can do it all?
Absolutely, and he helps out the family as well. He's been teaching me grade 1 piano, and he hopes, and I repeat, he hopes that I'm going to complete it in 12 months' time. And he also helps out Mum, because when Mum is teaching his sister, Mum sometimes says, Krish, go solve that problem and, help your sister out. So, yes, he can do it all.
Krish, you're a superstar.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on GB News. I'm Cameron Walker.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Sara Sharif failings. Did cultural sensitivities prevent teachers from alerting authorities ahead of her murder? One MP suggests the school may have been afraid after she started wearing a hijab to cover up her bruises. The Prime Minister had this to say.
the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who'll be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in.
It can be revealed now that there were at least 15 missed opportunities to save Sara's life. So just how badly did those authorities fail?
And in other news, the Prime Minister plans to bulldoze NIMBY objections and build houses on the Green Belt. He says that house building matters more than nature. Do you agree?
But are we going to push it through if those plans don't work? Yes, we absolutely are. Are we going to push away the planning rules and make them clearer, as we've done today? Get away the blockers that are stopping the housing being built? Yes.
Here in Downing Street, Antonio Costa is here, the European Union President, ahead of a big year for the UK and EU as Sir Keir Starmer rebuilds relations with the European Union.
And one NHS trust likens cousin marriages to white women having children over the age of 34 as the health service advertises roles for midwives specialising in inbred babies.
And the government has banned puberty blockers for teenagers indefinitely over what's being described as an unacceptable safety risk for children. Right, OK, big question for you, Cameron. Do you care more about house building or nature?
As a young person, I've got to say house building. Because there aren't enough of them. They're way too expensive, particularly in the big cities and particularly in the southeast. And you've got to build them somewhere. As and I think the usual co-host here, Tom Harwood, would probably say the same thing. He would probably also blame the Town and Country Planning Acts of the 1940s.
Don't I know it?
Oh, I bet you know it. I won't go on a rant about that. Don't worry, Emily. I'll save you from that one.
Thank you. If I hear more about planning regulations, you know.
Well, unfortunately, we are going to hear more about planning regulations.
We are, actually, yeah.
Because Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner and the Prime Minister are going to press forward with their plans to basically bulldoze through any objections from local councils when it comes to building more houses on the Greenbelt.
I find this a difficult one because I just wish we didn't need this many extra houses. I wish our governments had been more sensible when it came to immigration policy. So I wish we weren't in this position, but we are where we are. So obviously we do need more houses built. I would prefer that they looked nice. At least. Yeah. That would be nice, because some of these monstrosities, I don't know who the architects are, but they don't deserve to be in the job, in my opinion.
Not quite as big a monstrosity as 1950s and 60s, perhaps. They look slightly better. But of course, it's not just immigration that's the problem. The population has risen away from immigration as well. But it is a bit of a nightmare, I think, for the government getting the balance. But it's getting the balance, isn't it, between the need for more housing, lots of children in temporary accommodation at the moment, and, of course, keeping rural communities happy.
Yeah, lots of people in their 30s and 40s living with mum and dad still, or even the grandparents, which isn't a good place for our society, really, is it? Let us know, what do you think matters more, house building or nature? Keir Starmer says house building. So gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. It is your news headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you. The top stories. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says questions need to be answered over the awful case of 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her father and stepmother, describing the details as shocking. After years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. Yesterday, Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were found guilty of her murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, who lived with them, was convicted of causing or allowing her death. The Prime Minister says there needs to be safeguards for children, especially those being homeschooled like Sara.
This is just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who'll be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children. It's just the most awful case that many people, many viewers will find very, very, very hard to hear.
The number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 70% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warned of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. Downing Street says those reports of a tidal wave flu are proof of the broken NHS. Health leaders are warning that hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has urged people eligible for free vaccinations on the NHS to take them before it's too late. The government is today demanding immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of its plans to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer is vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. The new plans could mean increased developments on the Green Belt, though the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. Although the plans have been met with some criticism, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner sees it as a landmark overhaul. However, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Kevin Hollinrake says Labour's housing plans would amount to bulldozing those Greenbelt sites.
What I'm concerned about with these rules is that they're really going to drive a coach and horses, a bulldozer if you like, through local concerns about where they're going to be built and how they're going to be built. You know, 1.5 million homes, but lots of those homes are going to be built in Greenbelt, in rural areas. Targets in London will be reduced. Targets in most of the big rural areas across the country will be doubled. So it's really where they're going to be built is the concern. And the thing is, people's concerns are going to be completely swept aside by Angela Rayner in this headlong rush to build more homes when we've already got lots of planning consents around the country.
Housing and Planning Minister Matthew Pennycook says the government are committed to boosting economic growth, and he's also rejected calls that the government are bypassing local communities.
We want local communities involved early on with the production of local plans, because local development plans are the best way for individual communities to shape development in their areas and to come to a view as to how housing should be developed and where it should go. But it does have to be a conversation about how and where it goes rather than whether it happens at all. And that's because we've got an acute and entrenched housing crisis in England, and you will all know, your viewers will know, what that crisis means for people out there. It means 1.3 million people languishing on social housing waiting lists. It means a generation locked out of home ownership.
In other news, a man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years, the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. The 31-year-old initially denied violent disorder and arson with intent to endanger life, but later pleaded guilty to the charges. Jailing him, Judge Jeremy Richardson, KC, said this is one of the worst cases of its kind stemming from the Rotherham disorder. Fishlock's sentence, which also includes a 5-year licence period after he's released from jail, is the same as that of Thomas Burley, who was also part of the mob, some of whom attempted to torch the hotel in South Yorkshire. And drivers planning Christmas getaways are being warned to expect long queues because of record traffic levels. The AA predicted that Friday, the 20th of December, will be the busiest day on the roads during the festive period, with an estimated 23.7 million drivers planning a trip. That's more than the busiest Christmas getaway day of any year since the AA began recording its data in 2010. The joint second worst days for traffic jams over the 2024 festive period are expected to be the 21st and the 23rd of December each, with 22.7 million drivers expected on the roads. Amber traffic warnings have been issued by the AA for all 3 days. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
OK, it's 9 minutes past 1. Now, could teachers and social care have done more to protect Sara Sharif from the abuse she received for so many years?
Yeah, that's after years of what prosecutors have called horrific abuse. 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. But questions are now being asked if cultural sensitivities meant teachers were too afraid to question why Sara Sharif started wearing a hijab in school.
OK, well, Charlie Peters is here. Now, some might say this is just a case of incompetence, but it could actually be that cultural sensitivities had a role to play.
We're going to have a safeguarding review. We're going to have an inquest into her murder and her death. But at this stage, there are already lots of very damning questions to answer, because regardless of the justification or the answer that's provided, there's not going to be really any good outcomes to these questions. And on the issue of cultural sensitivities, that's being raised by Will Forster. He's the Lib Dems MP for Woking, who's only elected in July. Sara was murdered last August, so he's come into this role when it's been the most appalling tragedy to affect this town in Surrey. But clearly he's inherited an understanding of the situation, and more information has come out during the trial. And after those convictions yesterday by the jury, so much more information has been released on the background of these perpetrators and 10-year-old Sara Sharif. We now know, for example, that she was born into danger. The day she was born, she was already on a child protection order because of Irfan Sharif's criminal past. Now, to protect the trial, we couldn't have that information shared at the time, but we can now, for example, report that he was arrested on multiple occasions on allegations of domestic violence against both children and his former partners. It's been revealed, for example, since those convictions yesterday, that he was targeting vulnerable women, often Polish women, because he wanted to find a way to organise a sham marriage to secure his immigration status. Irfan Sharif is Pakistani. He was in Britain on a student visa before he married. So really appalling details being raised. But what's, I think, central to the concern that we're hearing now is information not being shared adequately with the authorities, particularly the police and social services, when those around her could and should have known more. And, for example, the key piece I think that's being raised now is this issue of Sara Sharif wearing a hijab, which started within the year of her death. Previously, no one in the family had been seen wearing hijab. It was a fairly large family with extended family living there. Faisal Malik, her uncle, who was also found guilty yesterday of causing or allowing the death of a child, he also was living in this household. No one in that family wore one. She started wearing one. Neighbours asked about it, and the conversation was shut down. Teachers knew that Sara already had injuries to her face and neck before she started wearing the hijab, and it was revealed in the trial that she started wearing the covering to cover up the injuries to her face and neck, injuries that were so extensive. We can't go through them all. It would take too long. In the trial, it took over a week of serious evidence from forensic pathologists, but there were several to her neck and her head. Bruising was visible. Questions now to be answered on whether or not cultural sensitivities meant that when she started wearing that hijab, people shied away from doing the right thing.
And, of course, away from cultural sensitivities, following the verdicts on Wednesday, Dame Rachel D'Souza, who's the Children's Commissioner for England, she highlighted the profound weaknesses in our child protection system as a whole.
Yeah, and they're extremely broad. And I think every time we have a case like this, people say, oh, lessons must be learnt. This can't be the case again. We want this child's legacy to be a change in the system. It does appear from the statements we're seeing from D'Souza, from the NSPCC, that there is actually optimism that this case is so shocking, the failures that could be revealed further are so extensive, that it might actually finally force some action. And I think, Cameron Emily, that the element about this case that's going to attract additional investigation and concern is the cultural sensitivities element. That is going to really set ablaze some of the questioning that's going to come forward now, because if it is revealed that teachers or social workers didn't want to raise concerns for fear of being Islamophobic or facing accusations of racism, then that will show that there's a serious imbalance in how our society deals with these issues.
It's just so crazy. If she suddenly started wearing this hijab, they'd noticed bruises in the past. And not to just have a female teacher just ask her to remove it, just to have a look, just to check. I mean, it is crazy. Or perhaps a Muslim woman could have come and checked. But yes, but you said that the police, and also I would say some of the media as well, using the picture of her wearing the hijab as their main picture when discussing this case. You find that insensitive?
Well, Emily, I mean, I had to raise it with Surrey Police this morning because they sent the press release yesterday following the guilty verdicts. A couple hours later, we had a statement from the Detective Chief Inspector who led the investigation. But in the press release they put out, with all the information about their work and, you know, welcoming these verdicts, the only photo they'd attached was of Sara Sharif wearing the hijab. They'd included an image of the tool of her abuse, one of the many tools of her abuse. There are many that were shown in the trial: a cricket bat, a metal pole. Her head was covered and she was taped down wearing bags that were found in bins in the house. Appalling abuse. But one of those tools of abuse was the hijab. That side police chose to use that to illustrate the verdicts. I think has raised some concerns, and I'm still waiting for an explanation of why they chose that photo.
And Charlie, just briefly, what happens next now? There must be some kind of inquiry, surely, into her death and what lessons can be learned.
There'll be an inquest. There should be a safeguarding review. But people involved in this case, including the local MP, have urged that to be as urgent as is possible.
Yeah, we always say we're going to learn lessons when there's a horrific case like this. But will we? Thank you very much indeed, Charlie Peters, our national reporter. Now, in other news, Angela Rayner has been accused of wanting to bulldoze through the entire home counties because the Deputy Prime Minister is preparing to unveil the biggest overhaul of planning rules in a generation to meet their government's house building targets.
Yeah, and it certainly got you guys talking in our inbox. But her plans are expected to include expanding the definition of low-quality green belts so homes can be built on previously protected land.
Yes, so the Prime Minister has been visiting a housing construction site in Huntington today as well. They're really pushing this message that they're the party to get cracking on house building, aren't they?
Yes. Well, let's go to Downing Street now and speak to GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, who is fresh out of the lobby with the government spokesperson. Chris, what are you hearing?
Yeah, hi Cameron, hi Emily, welcome back to Downing Street. Before we get on to planning and housing, quite a big moment just happened here. We had the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, arriving to meet with Sir Keir Starmer. He's been in post for 12 days, and that comes ahead of a very, very big year in the UK-EU relations. Number 10 are hinting or almost confirming that on the 3rd of February next year, Sir Keir Starmer will be meeting with all 27 leaders of the European Union. He also got a meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, the President. I think I can show you a clip of him arriving, and I asked a question of Mr. Costa as he arrived.
Is this the start of closer ties with the EU, Prime Minister? Mr. Costa, do you want to see young people travelling more easily between the EU and the UK?
So, Mr. Costa, I said to him, do you want to reset the relationship with the UK? And we think he said into a good one, which is interesting, I think. It shows this intent on the European Union to reset that relationship with the UK. Of course, what Donald Trump thinks of that, he becomes president on January the 20th. He wants to help tie the UK closer to the US, we think, from what we're hearing, and whether he approves on that, we'll find out. But elsewhere, that's right, there's been a big reset on planning policy here in Westminster. We've got a new national planning policy framework for policy on new homes in England. The government wants to build 370,000 new homes a year in this parliament, 1.5 million new homes. The PM, Sir Keir Starmer, has been with Angela Rayner. She's the Housing Secretary and Deputy PM in Peterborough. They appeared together there. 6,500 homes to be built there, along with a new school. So it's very important this gets it right. This is one of the key missions we've heard from Sir Keir Starmer last week in that event in Pinewood Studios. They want to build these new homes. Can they do it? And the big battle, I think, for next year for this government, not only on resetting the EU relationship, but domestically, it's building new homes in areas where some people won't want them built. So they're publishing information today to show which councils are not hitting their housing targets. These housing targets have been tweaked since the summer So more new homes in the south of England, where homes are more expensive, where more people live, more dense populations, and they're going to be upset about this building. And the battle here isn't with really Tory communities as much as Labour ones. The scale of Labour's win in that July election means you are going to see Labour MPs battling with the Labour government over these plans. It'll be quite controversial, I think. And just before I go, it is lunchtime, of course, Cameron and Emily. There's been some developments on the remarks by Kemi Badenoch to The Spectator today. She has said lunch is for wimps. She has said that sandwiches is not a proper lunch, and she likes a steak at her desk sometimes, and she won't touch moist bread. The PM has now got involved in this. The PM is surprised, we're told, by Downing Street, that the leader of the opposition has a steak brought for her for lunch. His favourite sandwich is, well, what do you think it is, you two?
Well, actually, I know so. I'm going to let you deliver the punchline there, Christopher, because I think I know already.
Okay.
So deliver the news.
So Keir Starmer's favourite lunch is a tuna sandwich, we are told by number 10. And occasionally, on special days, Cameron and Emily, he likes a cheese toastie, like we all do. And we're told by the PM's official spokesman that sandwiches are a great British institution. Sandwiches have just got political.
Yes,
Brilliant.
It's funny, isn't it? Keir Starmer, the patriotic points on the sandwiches. Christopher, thank you so much for bringing us that news out of the number 10 spokesperson. It's an interesting day when they have to comment on sandwiches.
Yeah.
Interested in this, what people at home make of this whole cozying up to the EU. Is that what you're seeing here? Is that what you think Keir Starmer's up to? I mean, there's a lot of talk about more defence and security cooperation, isn't there? There's still this idea of freedom of movement of young people being floated around. It's clearly what the EU like. In The Guardian today, the newspaper, there's some polling out. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's saying that Brexit voters would accept freedom of movement back if they were to get access to the single market. Once again, I'm not sure if I believe that, but there you go, there's one poll.
Yeah, and the government's insisting that there is going to be no return to freedom of movement this afternoon. Single markets and the customs union, of course, off the table, and no plans for the under-30s freedom of movement. That was something that reportedly the EU wanted when it comes to resetting that relationship between Britain and the EU.
Indeed it was. But we know what no plans mean. I mean, no plans yet.
Yes.
No plans yet. We shall see. We shall see if that happens. I don't know. Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News. We've got lots more coming up, including one NHS trust that's compared having children over the age of 34, if you're white and British, to cousin marriages in other communities. More on that next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And the latest series of Big Brother has just wrapped up. And as always, the housemates managed to cause a stir.
Yeah, that's an understatement. After 5 weeks of drama and twists and turns, 6 housemates were left to battle it out for a £90,000 prize.
Well, our next guest was there to the bitter end, coming third in this year's competition.
6 weeks you were in there.
Oh, I tell you what, it was a long time.
What goes through your mind? Is it, do you start to go a bit sort of, what do they call it, cabin fever?
Yeah.
Do you go a bit nutty?
Like, at times, not that I've ever been in prison, but I kind of likened it to being in jail, particularly when we were having to eat the porridge with water, no sugar, or, you know, that was difficult. And the feeling that you just can't leave. I mean, you can, but... You know, it was,
You can, but you won't get your hands on that prize money.
No, exactly.
You made it to the end.
Yeah.
And it's quite a big house, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you feel as though you can get away from housemates if they're annoying you a bit, or does it feel like your hot house with people you don't like very much?
If you're sort of, you know, if you're not comfortable with a certain conversation or something like that, you can always take yourself and move away. But can you have time to yourself? No. Not really. I mean, even you might think, do you know what, I'll just go and lock myself in the toilet for a few minutes. There's a camera and there's a mic in there, so you can't escape that. And then you're obviously wearing a mic, so there is that little feeling of, you know, I could just do with having 5 minutes to myself, but you can't really get it.
You've met up with one side of the house, but not the other side yet. But is that still on the cards, do you think?
I hope so, yeah, because I liked every single person in that house, despite a few whispers on the internet, you know, like, do you not like this? I liked everybody in the house, never had a bad word with anybody, so...
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. It is 1:25. Now, material drawn up by health chiefs in Bradford have described cousin marriages as a cultural practice and likens it to white women starting families later on in life after the age of 34.
Yes. Meanwhile, the NHS has also been advertising for midwives who specialise in inbred babies.
Well, this all comes after Tory chair Richard Holden calls for first cousin marriages to be banned due to health concerns.
OK, well, joining us now is broadcaster and neurodiversity coach Fahima Mohammed. Fahima, thank you very much for coming on. Of course, this is a sensitive topic, but I don't think it should be. It's clear that first cousin marriage is risky. When it comes to children. I mean, people might not like it anyway from a cultural perspective, but in terms of health, it's not good. It's not good. There are lots of different risks, and fortunately, it is going down in its prevalence. But what do you make of this NHS website seemingly comparing white women having babies after 34 as women in other communities having babies from first cousin marriage? What do you think?
I think there's a lot to compare in a way that genetically there's always issues around having children, and when it comes to genetics, whether it's first cousin or even getting married later. However, I think the ban is something that the government would not apply because that would be taken off the freedom of autonomy and it doesn't really address the issue of education as to why these things happen. And I think both sides needs to be clear that it's not just a Muslim and a cultural problem either. It's just the fact that people are changing those ways as well. And Muslims come from all different backgrounds. They don't all follow. I mean, Pakistani is not my particular background, and I would not follow that suit. And I've actually put a post out on that, educating on the fact that you do need to take more interest with regards to sort of marrying your cousins, and obviously the more DNA you have of each other, there is more risks. However, I do feel that if we are going to have a ban on something like that, then obviously there are more NHS problems when it comes to alcohol consumption, when it comes to obesity. So, you know, making so many comparisons takes away that freedom. And there's so many people that don't like marriages, whether it comes to same sex, whether it comes to so many other rules, that in this country we have freedom to make those choices. I think it would be better to educate people on genetics, on biology, on certain things that is not suitable for their health, and it doesn't stigmatize and it doesn't make it sensitive. But just calling out one and talking in that way, that's why that comparison was made, because it was like as if to say every Muslim is actually, they're bound in this sort of day and age to still think in a backward term to marry their first cousins, which none in my family particularly does, and many other Muslims don't either. So that's the actual issue there with the comparison.
And Fahima, do you think that there's a generational shift here on that theme? Because a study published last year suggested that the number of people in, for example, Bradford's Pakistani community who had married a cousin has fallen in the past 10 years, and it suggests that higher educational attainments, new family dynamics and changes to immigration rules could have played a part in that.
Well, I think everyone is quite integrated and living in the West where they have more choices. And even these cultural norms are breaking down. And when I speak to the Pakistani community, yes, they are more likely to have some sort of culture in their sort of families before even religion in some instances. But it is a breakdown according to the new generation. But again, it's their choice, just like everybody else. We're not in an extremist country. We have that right. And just if we have it, even if people don't like it, like everything else, like I mentioned before.
Yeah, but Fahima, it could be costing the NHS a huge amount of money. It's not something that the average British person in this country thinks is a good thing or beneficial. A lot of people, you speak to a lot of people and they say, I thought it was banned already. I thought it was banned already. It's harming children.
I get that. And most people probably don't speak to Pakistanis to understand that maybe it still exists and it shouldn't. Again, that's a personal choice. But if you're talking about the NHS, like I mentioned before, the hospital admission due to alcohol conditions lead to approximately 280,000. Okay, so if you want to talk about that, let's talk about
whataboutery, Fahima. That's whataboutery. You can't say, okay, well, you know, alcohol's bad too, obesity's bad too.
Exactly, but that's what I'm trying to say. There is so many things that's costing the NHS, and this is one of the nominals. Okay, but it's not the main one, because that's why the government haven't banned it. Because if it was to really take into the statistics account as to what's costing the NHS, it is predominantly the culture of alcohol. You go and see the prescriptions, the dependency, it's obesity, it's mental health, it's even alcohol being consumed by pregnant women, FASD. Most people don't know about it. You know, I am part of that, where I help and coach people in that certain particular way, where they have children in that way, which actually have parents that have actually consumed alcohol during pregnancy. I think these are also issues that needs to be raised, not just picking on one particular thing that can again lead to a particular culture and then highlight like as if we're all backwards and it only applies to us and we're costing the NHS. No, we are not just also costing the NHS or the Pakistani community, for example. It is the whole lot of other areas that we need to address.
But I mean, Fahima, we talk at length. We're going to be discussing whether there should be a tax on junk food because people are eating too much in this country. We talk about the cost of alcoholism and drug addiction on the NHS. This is a specific problem in this country. Yes, unfortunately, it's more common within the Pakistani community. That is just a fact. That is just a fact that it's more common within the Pakistani community. And a lot of people in this country are shocked that there is still a high rate of first cousin marriage within that community. And, you know, politicians are thinking of banning it.
How alcohol is like a poison to your brain, which neuroscientists says that, but everyone still does it and no one picks up on that. Is it because it's something that is part of British culture? So if you want to pick on another culture because you don't like the culture, that's what it comes down to. So we need to understand how we analyze information and put that across, and then maybe we can have a balanced
but this is about the children that you have, right? I mean, if you're an alcoholic, you are harming your own body, but not necessarily your child.
That are also highly infected, alcoholic parents that produce children, which is also another thing that no one ever talks about.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. It is a huge issue. Fahima Mohammed, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate the back and forth. Broadcaster and neurodiversity coach.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
There we go. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show, including a Bristol University student who has been kidnapped in Venezuela, believed to have been taken by the country's political police force. More on that in just a moment. But first, your news headlines with Tatiana.
Cameron, thank you very much. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says questions need to be answered over the awful case of 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her father and stepmother, describing the details as shocking. After years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. Yesterday, Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were found guilty of her murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, who lived with them, was convicted of causing or allowing her death. The Prime Minister said there need to be safeguards for children, especially those being homeschooled like Sara.
This is just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who will be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children. It's just the most awful case that many people, many viewers will find very, very, very hard to hear.
The Prime Minister welcomed European Commission President Antonio Costa to Downing Street, saying it was a great privilege. Sir Keir Starmer said there were many things for us to discuss of mutual concern and interest. Sir Keir continues with what he's calling a reset of relations between the EU and the UK. It's the first meeting of its kind since Brexit. On Monday, in a speech to Eurozone finance ministers in Brussels, Chancellor Rachel Reeves said negotiations with the EU on a new trading relationship would start in the new year. And the number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 70% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warned of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. NHS leaders are warning that hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. An average of 1,861 patients with flu were in hospital every day last week, up from 1,099 in the previous week and 3.5 times higher than the same time last year. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has urged people eligible for free vaccinations on the NHS to take them before it's too late. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome along to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's grey and misty out there for most of us, damp for some as well, but still some brightness to be had, mostly across parts of Scotland where high pressure is sitting. That high pressure has led to frost and fog in parts of Scotland, but for many away from the foggier areas there is some brightness, particularly north of the central belt inland. Otherwise, much of the UK, cloudy skies, and that cloud is lowered across parts of East Wales, the Midlands, eastern England, and that low cloud is bringing outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Otherwise, temperatures of 8 or 9 Celsius in the south. It's not going to feel very pleasant with the grey, misty skies, but colder than that across parts of Scotland after a frosty start. We keep the grey skies into the evening across most of England and Wales. Some cloud breaks for West Wales into western parts of Northern Ireland, for example, but the most extensive cloud breaks will always be through the Highlands and Grampians, Caithness, Sutherland, where, again, temperatures will fall under those clear skies overnight. So frosty conditions and temperatures as low as -8, -9 Celsius in sheltered parts. However, the gap in the cloud across parts of Scotland is being nibbled away from all angles. We've got cloud approaching from the south overnight. We've got cloud approaching from the northwest as well, and that's going to bring outbreaks of rain in. But we start off Friday with a touch of frost in the far northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, another grey start, a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog, and patchy drizzle. The drizzle most likely across southern parts of England and Wales into western and northwestern Scotland, as well as the east coast. And all in all, it's, although technically mild, it's not going to feel very pleasant under the grey skies, turning even milder through the weekend.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Issues for the M4 in Wiltshire heading toward London, so eastbound on the M4. Junction 15 to 14 closed. That's Swindon east towards Hungerford. There's long queues as a spillage of hydraulic fluid gets dealt with. Queues for the A419 into Marlborough and queues into Hungerford as well. Some delays too for the clockwise M25. Firstly, Wisley to Chertsey, junction 10 to 11, and then before Lakeside at 30 clockwise slow going. Issues in Kent as well this afternoon. Coastbound M26 is currently closed from the M25 to Rotherham at 2A, queuing before the Clackett Lane services. It follows an earlier lorry fire. And Jubilee Way in Dover, the A2 closed both ways between St Margaret's at Cliff, the A258, the Deal roundabout, and the A20, the Eastern Docks roundabout.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. The time is 1:39. Now, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy is being urged to intervene as a British graduate is reportedly abducted by the Venezuelan political police.
As Jesus Armas, a pro-democracy activist, played a role in the Venezuelan opposition campaign against President Nicolas Maduro during his heavily disputed re-election in July.
Well, joining us now is the former Conservative MP, Steve Baker. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. This election has very much been contested, hasn't it? And there are a number of political opponents who appear to have disappeared or have been locked up.
Yes, it seems that over 2,000 people have been locked up by the authoritarian socialist regime of Maduro. Instead of accepting the election result, he set about persecuting his opponents. It's totally unacceptable. And one of those over 2,000 people locked up seems to be Jesus Armas, a graduate of Bristol University, formerly an intern at the Institute of Economic Affairs, a good man who went out there to help millions of people live better lives by standing up to this authoritarian regime. And it's a real outrage that he's suffered this enforced disappearance.
Yeah, Steve, do we have any idea of what might have happened to him? Was he bundled into a car? Was he meant to be somewhere and he didn't turn up? What do we know?
Well, he was in hiding and he was apparently bundled off the street by masked men, believed to belong to Venezuela's political police, and he's apparently been taken to a well-known torture centre. The fact that such things exist in our world today is a shame on the nation of Venezuela, and obviously it's an extremely worrying time for his family and his friends.
And Steve, Mr. Maduro, it seems to have retained support from key allies such as Russia or China. Does that surprise you?
Not really. I mean, look, these are authoritarian regimes in their own way in Russia and China. The world's really polarising between decent democracies who believe in free trade and individual rights and the authoritarian collectivist nations like Russia and like China. And really, the people of Russia and China, like the people of Venezuela, deserve better. So I'm not surprised they continue to support Venezuela. But our government, with David Lammy as Foreign Secretary, should really stand up for what's right and demand that the government of Venezuela release those political prisoners and give way and give up power.
Yeah, and so far, has there been any word from the Foreign Office on this? Letters have been written, questions have been asked. Any movement?
Not that I'm aware of. The Institute of Economic Affairs are in the lead because he was one of their interns. I'm very pleased to lend my support to their campaign and join this demand. I do think that David Lammy should act, and it really shouldn't take a lot of pressure to get him to do so. You know, I know for all our disagreements, he's a man who believes in human rights, and I'm sure he will wish to seize this moment and get on and demand the release of over 2,000 people, including Jesus.
But would Maduro actually listen to Foreign Secretary David Lammy? How much power, realistically, would David Lammy have in this situation?
Well, that, of course, is one of the torments of diplomacy, is there's very little direct power that can be applied. However, of course, this is the fundamental run of diplomatic relations. The whole world needs to unite and tell Venezuela this can't go on. The people have suffered too much already, and they should meet normal international standards of human rights. But, of course, you're right, there's no direct power, but that's the business of diplomats, to find a way to exert some leverage, to insist on what's right, and to make it, hopefully, untenable for that regime to go on imprisoning people as they are doing.
I mean, I know of Jesus from my time at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and it's very, very worrying indeed to hear this story. And I really, really hope that somehow we can put the diplomatic pressure on for him to be released, because he must be. If he's been detained in a torture centre, I mean, you know, the mind boggles. I don't even want to think of what could be happening to him. So hope, 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 and thank you for supporting this. Hopefully he'll be taken back to freedom. He'll be saved. Steve Baker, thank you very much indeed, a former Conservative MP there. Oh, just abducted, taken by the political police, potentially taken to this torture centre. Terrifying.
And incredibly brave, of course, for speaking out about pro-democracy as well. But, of course, he has now disappeared and we don't know where he is. And it's just, you know, shocking that Venezuela is going through this tormenting time.
Yeah, the sort of thing that happens in a lot of countries where if you dare to speak out against a political leader, you dare to be an opposition voice, you can find yourself taken in by the political police, and God knows what next.
And I think it was very interesting to hear what Steve Baker had to say about the fact that Russia and China appear to be supporting this president in Venezuela, and how the world seems to be polarising more between democratic countries and dictatorships. And I'm not quite sure how that ends.
Well, that's a big ...
changes.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, this is one for you. Human rights groups have hit out at FIFA after they awarded Saudi Arabia the right to host the World Cup in 2034. What do you make of that decision? More next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
My next guest's book will certainly provoke you. Lord Sarch's book, Orgasm, probes 21 such ideas, chapter by chapter, in a stimulating reading experience, covering subjects from geopolitics and etiquette to the economy and the afterlife. Maurice Sarchi argues that rigorous thinking can create a blissful mental experience.
Well, the title is Orgasm, and I try to investigate the question of whether it's possible for there to be an orgasm of the mind, which is equal in bliss to a physical orgasm. That's very interesting. And theoretically, the way that arises, I'll finish. Theoretically, the way that arises is by addressing conflicting ideas, and then for there to be a revelation of true wisdom. That's the purpose of the book. And I think you can sum up British politics completely in 2 sentences. You will understand very well, Michael. Conservatives are efficient but cruel. Labour is caring but incompetent. So you can see there that if you have a situation in which the Conservative Party turns out to be, in people's opinion, inefficient and cruel, well, then you're likely to have a very bad election result, which is exactly what we just did. And why?
So you have quite a lot to say to Kemi Badenoch. I mean, the first thing you'd say to her would be, read my book, please, I suppose.
Well, that's absolutely the first thing. It's a perfect Christmas present for her to give, as I was saying. So that's number one. So after she's done that, well, then her level of wisdom, which I'm sure is already very high, will be greatly increased, and she'll be able to address the complex, provocative, controversial issues aired in this book.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1:48. Now, it's been announced that Saudi Arabia will be the ones to host the 2034 FIFA World Cup, for which it was the sole bidder.
Yeah, however, the decision has been called blatant sports washing, with activists highlighting Saudi Arabia's poor record on both LGBT and workers' rights.
OK, well, let's get the thoughts now of sports broadcaster Chris Scudder. Chris, what do you make to this decision, then? They were the sole bidder. Why are not many other countries bidding for this job?
Well, it would have been, actually. Australia would have liked to have done it, but it was pretty much a three-line whip. I mean, Australia, it's no surprise it's gone to Saudi Arabia, but Australia were going to bid, but they got 25 days notice or thereabouts at the back end of last year and had no time to get their ducks in a row. Listen, when push comes to shove, money talks. Money talks. The back was broken by Qatar which seems ages ago now, but it wasn't. It was only 2 years ago, the 2022 World Cup. And the same issues are coming up once again. But listen, we know that FIFA are going to get very rich from this, and they will have big sponsorship deals with Saudi oil companies, that kind of thing. And the same complaints are going to come up. But one thing I think we can be sure of, it will be a very good World Cup. They're very good at putting sport on, and they've dominated so many sports now financially, Formula One, golf, boxing in particular. And this is really the icing on the cake for them. This is the one they really wanted. You saw the celebrations there yesterday. This means an awful lot to them, but a lot of dissenting voices again around the world.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned Qatar, and I remember the outrage around their human rights record, particularly as stadiums were being built, workers dying as those stadiums were being built. But FIFA have come out and said that they wanted assurances from Saudi Arabia that all fans, whether they're LGBT or not, would be protected. Do you think there is any guarantee in that when they do come to host?
I think they're doing a little bit of work. I mean, women's football is starting to grow in Saudi. I mean, it's a long time away, really, 10 years. Interesting when you mention assurances, because the FA also wanted assurances, and they have kind of backed this bid. But then you can look at it and think, well, if they didn't, then the FA, I know, would love to put on a Women's World Cup, and that might upset FIFA if they sort of went against the grain. So there were no dissenting voices, partly because, you know, everyone knew it was going to go to Saudi.
I mean, Chris, it kind of makes a mockery of the old rainbow armband thing, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of virtue signalling when it comes to pride and all of this, and progress and all of this. But then actually, we're all right with it being in Saudi Arabia, where, you know, gay people don't have many rights and women don't either.
Money talks, Emily. You know it. You know it, the world goes around. It always has done. You mentioned those rainbow armbands, and that's another thing with FIFA. I remember you can see the picture behind me. That was taken in Qatar a couple of years ago. A lot of foreign fans, which is part of the FIFA remit. They want to grow the game, and let's be honest, it is growing the game by going to these places. But the rainbow armband thing. Do you remember that the FA said, listen, if we're not allowed to wear the One Love thing on our arm, then, you know, we're going to create the stink. And then they backed down simply because FIFA said to them, well, if you don't do as you're told, we're going to show, and you do wear the armband, we're going to show you a yellow card. And therefore, the FA backed down, and it kind of went away. So, you know, FIFA holding all the cards here. But it is, you know, it's a three-line whip, you know, really. I mean, it was...
Chris,
all the World Cups.
How come Australia only had 25 days' notice to put in a bid?
Listen, yeah, I mean, it was. It's a complicated story, but there was a lot of pushing and shoving, and I don't think Australia really had enough time to get their bid together. But when FIFA, the consultation process wasn't widely known, and Australia just didn't have enough time. I think Oceania, because of the rotation policy, that it would have either gone to Asia or to Oceania, which is Australia and New Zealand. Australia, by the way, are going to join Asia soon, so that further weakened their position. But they just didn't have enough time. And anyway, you know, the Saudi bid technically it is going to be very, very strong. But then you've got the whole lot of the green issues. Is it going to be a carbon neutral World Cup? They said it would be in Qatar, but it wasn't. Trust me. I can remember the one stadium, not the one you can see behind there, which was the one in Lucelle where the final. Look how glamorous it looks. Amazing. There's one made out of container ships, but it was all very token. You know, it was literally built. I'm sure in Saudi it will be amazing. They're going to build one of the 11 carbon neutral. Don't think so. On the end of edge of a cliff in this new purpose-built resort called Neom. So you know, it'll have a massive wow factor. It'll be organised to within an inch of its life.
I'm sure it will. There'll be a huge amount of money put into it. Chris Scudder, thank you so much for talking us through all of that. Sports broadcaster, of course. I mean, yeah, huge amounts of money we were spent on it. I mean, Saudi Arabia are paying influencers over here to go over to Saudi Arabia, to go over to Riyadh and have a fantastic holiday over there and all of this. There's quite a lot of this going on.
And the same thing happened with Qatar. Remember David Beckham and the flack he got for the LGBT record in Qatar? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Karen says, in awarding the World Cup to Saudi Arabia, we've lost the right to criticise human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia without appearing to be massive hypocrites. I think that is an issue. Yeah. You know, if everyone's going over there everywhere from all these different countries. Keir Starmer said he wouldn't go to Qatar. What's going to happen this time? I don't know. It's Good Afternoon Britain. Lots more coming up on today's show, so stick with us after the weather.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update for GB News from the Met Office. Some sunshine out there today, mostly across central parts of Scotland. Generally cloudy elsewhere, with a lot of low cloud, mist and drizzle that's trapped under this area of high pressure and particularly affecting parts of central and eastern UK, with the low cloud having arrived from the North Sea and producing some spells of light rain and drizzle for East Wales, parts of the Midlands, East Anglia, the South East, as well as Northern England. Some drizzle as well for western and northwestern Scotland, but we cling on to some clear spells overnight in the northeast of Scotland, where there will be a touch of frost, but under the blanket of cloud elsewhere, it's going to stay frost-free. We start off Friday with that extensive low cloud across virtually the whole of the country, just some gaps in it across parts of northwest and northeast Scotland. Otherwise, outbreaks of rain increasingly affecting western Scotland, northwest England, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, but some clear spells there for Northern Ireland. England and Wales, mostly, again, a lot of low cloud, mistiness, hill fog about first thing, so a gloomy start, but temperatures around the mid-single figures, so not a particularly frosty start to the day. As we go through the day, little change, although it will turn wetter and windier in the far northwest of Scotland as well as the Northern Isles, and there'll be some light rain across some western coasts, although the rain in the east will tend to ease away. It's a grey day for many places, highs of 5 to 8 Celsius. Now into Friday night, this area of rain will push southeastwards across Scotland, fizzling out and turning more showery as it moves into Northern Ireland and reaches Northern England later on. That's going to clear south, and through the weekend, a change to more changeable weather, wettest in the north, but milder everywhere.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine getting the call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock. That is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
myth. I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 12th of December. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Cameron Walker.
Sara Sharif failings. Did cultural sensitivities prevent teachers from alerting authorities ahead of her murder? One MP suggests the school may have been too afraid to say anything after she started wearing a hijab to cover her bruises. The Prime Minister said this.
The most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who'll be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered.
15 missed opportunities to save Sara's life. We'll assess them and look at just how badly those authorities could have failed.
The Prime Minister plans to bulldoze NIMBY objections to build houses on the Greenbelt. A sensible idea? Or will he make Britain a concrete jungle?
But are we going to push it through if those plans don't work? Yes, we absolutely are. Are we going to push away the planning rules and make them clearer, as we've done today? Get away the blockers that are stopping the housing being built? Yes.
Sir Keir Starmer also meets with new EU Council President Antonio Costa, who tells GB News this lunchtime he'll put UK and EU relations on a good path.
OK, and one NHS trust likens cousin marriages to white women having children over the age of 34. That's as the health service advertises for roles for midwives specialising in inbred babies.
And the government bans puberty blockers for teenagers indefinitely over what's being described as an unacceptable safety risk for children.
And a memorial fit for a queen. £46 million will be given to build a memorial of our late Queen Elizabeth II at St James's Park. £46 million.
Now, we've been discussing Kemi Badenoch's controversial comments when it comes to lunch in The Spectator. What is a lunch break? Lunch is for wimps, and I quote from the Conservative Party leader, the Prime Minister's spokesperson hitting back, saying that a sandwich is a British institution. We've been asking for your views very much on sandwiches and all things lunch. Ian's been in touch. He sent us a picture of his lunch, which I think many people might say is an amazing full English breakfast, is what I would say, a fry-up. I'm not quite sure if it's a lunch or not, but whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, is that lunch, Ian? Ian, really, is that lunch? It looks like very much like a breakfast to me. Perhaps a brunch. Perhaps a brunch on a weekend. On a weekend. I mean, the effort you've put in there. 2 sausages, 2 rashers, lots of little tomatoes, 2 perfectly poached eggs, some mushrooms, and is that black pudding in the top?
Yeah, it looks like it. HB sauce. It certainly beats my cereal bar, Ian, that's for sure.
What's he going to have on Christmas Day?
I know. What Christmas dinner? Turkey and trimmings,
for breakfast.
Maybe.
If he's having that just on a random Thursday.
I know.
What a treat.
Margaret's saying she's having leek and potato soup with British veg.
More humble. That's far more humble a lunch, but a tasty one. I saw someone was having a broccoli and Stilton soup, so there you go, the British classics. I do find it funny that Keir Starmer has a favourite sandwich straight off the bat, but he can't think of a favourite Christmas movie.
No.
So there you go. Cares more about food, perhaps, than than Christmas movies.
Quite possibly. Well,
Make of that what you will. Make of that what you will.
Maybe his spokesperson's a bit quicker off the mark than Prime Minister himself when it comes to his favourite institutions.
Well, you think the spokesperson made that up?
No, I don't think he made it up. I just think he knew what Prime Minister's favourite sandwich was.
Off the cuff.
And an occasional cheese toastie, as he said.
I don't know about that. GBnews.com/yoursay is the way to get in touch. Please do get in touch. Also, what do you make of all this cozying up with the EU? Do you think that's what it is, cozying up? Christopher Hope's going to be speaking to us a little bit more about that. Could there be a return to freedom of movement for the under-30s? It could happen, Cameron. It could happen.
It could.
GBnews.com/yoursay. But it's the news headlines with Tatiana.
Cameron, Emily, thank you very much. The top stories. Well, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says questions need to be answered over the awful case of 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her father and stepmother, describing the details as shocking. After years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. Yesterday, Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were found guilty of her murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, was convicted of causing or allowing her death. New findings published a day after Sara's father and stepmother were found guilty show more than 480 children in England were affected by serious incidents between April 2023 and March last year. The Prime Minister says there need to be safeguards for children, especially those being homeschooled like Sara.
This is just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who'll be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children. So it's just the most awful case that many people, many viewers will find very, very, very hard to hear.
In other news, the number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 70% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warned of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. NHS leaders are warning that hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. An average of 1,861 patients with flu were in hospital every day last week, up from 1,099 in the previous week and 3.5 times higher than the same time last year. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has urged people eligible for free vaccinations on the NHS to take them before it's too late. The government is today demanding immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of its plans to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer's vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. The new plans could mean increased developments on the Green Belt, though the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. Although the plans have been met with criticism, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner sees it as a landmark overhaul. Shadow levelling up, Secretary Kevin Hollinrake says Labour's housing plans would amount to bulldozing those Greenbelt sites.
What I'm concerned about with these rules is that they're really going to drive a coach and horses, a bulldozer if you like, through local concerns about where they're going to be built and how they're going to be built. You know, 1.5 million homes, but lots of those homes are going to be built in Greenbelt, in rural areas. Targets in London will be reduced. Targets in most of the rural areas, big rural areas across the country will be doubled. So it's really where they're going to be built is the concern. And the thing is, people's concerns are going to be completely swept aside by Angela Rayner in this headlong rush to build more homes when we've already got lots of planning consents around the country.
Housing and Planning Minister Matthew Pennycook says the government are committed to boosting economic growth, and he's also rejected calls that they're bypassing local communities.
We want local communities involved early on with the production of local plans, because local plans, local development plans, are the best way for individual communities to shape development in their areas and to come to a view as to how housing should be developed and where it should go. But it does have to be a conversation about how and where it goes rather than whether it happens at all. And that's because we've got an acute and entrenched housing crisis in England, and you will all know, your viewers will know, what that crisis means for people out there. It means 1.3 million people languishing on social housing waiting lists. It means a generation locked out of home ownership.
The Prime Minister welcomed European Commission President Antonio Costa to Downing Street today, saying it was a great privilege. Sir Keir Starmer said there were many things for us to discuss of mutual concern and interest. Sir Keir continues with what he's calling a reset of relations between the EU and the UK. It's the first meeting of its kind since Brexit. As the GB News political editor Christopher Hope said just moments ago, Costa has reportedly told GB News today that he will put the UK and the EU on a good path. On Monday, in a speech to Eurozone finance ministers in Brussels, Chancellor Rachel Reeves said negotiations with the EU on a new trading relationship would start in the new year. A man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years, the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. The 31-year-old initially denied violent disorder and arson with intent to endanger life, but later pleaded guilty to the charges. Jailing him, Judge Jeremy Richardson KC said this is one of the worst cases of its kind stemming from the Rotherham disorder. Fishlock's sentence, which also includes a 5-year licence period after he's released from jail, is the same as that of Thomas Burley, who was also part of the mob, some of whom attempted to torch the hotel in South Yorkshire. And an 8-month-old girl is in a serious condition after being attacked by a dog and airlifted to hospital. The animal's now been seized and destroyed and is believed to be a registered XL bully type. The attack happened at around 2 p.m. yesterday inside a property in Siskin Close in Hawkinge near Folkestone in Kent. An 18-year-old man and a 76-year-old woman have been arrested on suspicion of being in charge of a dog dangerously out of control. Kent police said they were still in custody and officers would remain in the area as investigations continue. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Right, good afternoon, Britain. It's 11 minutes past 2. Now, could teachers and social care services have done more to protect Sara Sharif from the abuse?
Yeah, that's after years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse. Even 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death.
Yes, but now questions are being asked as to whether cultural sensitivities meant teachers were just too afraid to question why Sara Sharif suddenly started wearing a hijab in school.
Well, we're joined now by Charlie Peters in the studio with us. Charlie, there seems to be so many missed opportunities here, and it appears teachers may have been too afraid to speak out about their concerns.
Yeah, well, last night and this morning, Dame Rachel de Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England and Wales, says there can be no doubt that Sara was failed in the starkest terms by those who should have and could have protected her, because they're pointing to 15 missed opportunities to intervene and prevent this abuse that Sara suffered. Right back from the day, actually, that she was born, because she was born into a child protection order due to concerns raised about Irfan Sharif's past. He had, it was said, manipulated women into sham relationships. He wanted a sham marriage in order to exploit visa and immigration rules with women from the EU, particularly Polish women he targeted and regularly had relationships with. There's one 17-year-old girl who he started a relationship with who reported things to the police. Another Polish woman fled back to Poland and sent emails to Surrey police reporting concerns, but action wasn't taken. It's also alleged that he started a relationship with the woman when she was a girl, actually. She was 15 when their relationship started. He was an adult at the time, having arrived as a student. So lots of concerns about his past, but it's the more recent concerns that have attracted so much attention and pushed forward these fresh questions for the authorities. In particular, that there were so many incidents when Sara Sharif was at school or was noticed by people as having injuries and insufficient action was taken. Now, the concern about cultural sensitivities and the questions around that do refer to the fact that she started wearing a hijab, but no reports were made by the school about that because they had seen injuries to her face and neck before her teachers had on Sara, But when she started wearing the hijab, there were no questions saying, is that being used to cover up her injuries? We now know that they were. Now, those questions are being raised primarily on the cultural issues by Will Forster, who's the Lib Dem MP for Woking. He says that has to be central to any safeguarding review and any inquest into her death, the process that he's urged to take place as soon as possible and be extremely thorough. But in terms of some examples, perhaps, of people not really recognising the cultural sensitivity here yesterday, in this case, yesterday, Surrey Police put out a press release after the guilty verdicts came in, and the only image that they used of Sara was her wearing a hijab, wearing, quite frankly, a tool of her abuse, something that was used by her murderers to cover up the many horrific, hundreds of horrific internal and external injuries that she endured. Now, I raised this concern with Surrey Police this morning. I finally do have a statement back from them. Surrey Police said that the death of Sara Sharif was tragic, and the details shared throughout the trial have been both upsetting and shocking. The image of Sara in her hijab, amongst others, was used throughout the investigation and trial. We have provided access to all available images which show Sara at different stages in her short life, with media outlets able to choose the most appropriate imagery for their reporting. This is a recent image of Sara which was suitable for releasing to the public and approved to be shared. Now, it's the only image they used in that press release yesterday. As I said, there was a range previously, but it's the one that they attached. And I've raised this with them since they brought the statement, but I think a lot of people will listen to that and they'll point to the term her hijab. She was a 10-year-old girl, OK, and we know that the hijab and the face covering was put on her by her abusers to cover up her abuse. Now, maybe our audience might say I'm being pernickety and being a little bit too focused on that specific detail, but saying her hijab, to me, seems to be another potential error here, because it's not hers, it wasn't her choice. When neighbours raised concerns about the use of this covering, the parents, Irfan Sharif and the stepmother, Bainash Batul, both now convicted of murder, immediately shut down the conversation. And she was the only member of the family to wear that covering. Surrey Police say it's a suitable image to share with the guilty verdicts, and they say it's her hijab.
It's another case of potentially those unnecessary cultural sensitivities getting in the way. Charlie Peters, thank you very much indeed. Charlie, our national reporter there.
Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is continuing his charge towards closer ties with the EU.
Yesterday, he welcomed the EU Council's new chief, Antonio Costa.
Well, let's go to Westminster now and speak to GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope. And Chris, what are you hearing from the Prime Minister's spokesperson this afternoon?
That's right. Hi, Cameron, and hi, Emily. Welcome back to the GB News studio here in Westminster. That's right. There's a meeting just happened just now between Antonio Costa, who's the president of the European Council of 27 leaders of the individual nations within the European Union, and Sir Keir Starmer. Quite an important meeting. They discussed whether Sir Keir Starmer will go to a meeting on the 3rd of February with all 27 EU leaders, and they looked ahead to a key summit, a summit between Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president, and Sir Keir Starmer, when a lot will be decided on the future direction of UK relations with the EU. Now, I was in Downing Street just moments ago when Antonio Costa left, and I asked him a question for GB News viewers. Here's what he had to say. Mr. Costa, how will you reset a quick word, GB News? Mr. Costa, a quick word for GB News? Yes. How will you reset the relationship, sir?
Sorry?
How do you plan to reset the relationship with the UK?
Oh, you are in the good path.
Good path. There you have it, a good path. That's the first comments he's made since appointed 12 days ago to the EU Council, made to GB News, a good path between the UK and EU. Now, what a good path looks like for the EU may not be the same as a good path as seen by GB News viewers and listeners. We'll stay across that. And in fact, on my podcast, Chopper's Political Podcast tomorrow, we've interviewed the German ambassador to the UK, and he gives further indications of how that might look. And elsewhere, we've heard from the Prime Minister today on his plans to get this country building 370,000 new homes a year by ripping up or changing the national planning policy framework and adding in new requirements on councils to build more homes, particularly in the south of England, where there's a lot of pressure on land. That may be a battle, not with Tories so much as Labour MPs. And I think that Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner were around earlier saying they're not going to be afraid to go into that fight. There's also been some chat about sandwiches. It is lunchtime. You've been mentioning it already. Kevin Badenoch, the Tory leader, told The Spectator magazine that, in her view, lunch is for wimps, quoting Gordon Gekko from that 1980s film Wall Street. She says she has food brought in. She works and eats all the time. There's no time, she says. Sometimes she gets a steak. I'm not a sandwich person, she says. They aren't a real food. That's controversial for many people who like sandwiches. And she says she won't touch bread if it's moist, which again has caused some reaction here in Westminster, given the serious nature of other news. Sometimes the more frivolous stuff catches the eye. In response, we've heard from the PM's official spokesman already within the past hour or two. He, Sir Keir Starmer, is surprised that Kevin Badenoch has a steak brought in for lunch, he says. Sir Keir Starmer's favourite lunch is a tuna sandwich and occasionally a cheese toastie. And he adds that sandwiches are a great British institution. More as we get it.
Hang on, Christopher. I heard that maybe Nigel Farage was also going to leap into this discussion. Have we heard anything about Nigel Farage's favourite sandwich yet?
Well, we do know that Nigel Farage likes to lunch. I've had many of them, but normally involve at least 2 bottles of wine. And me leaving the restaurant forgetting to pay the bill. That actually happened about a decade ago. So he's much healthier now. We are expecting a video to drop from Mr Farage on his favourite lunch. Stay tuned to GB News.
Yes, there might be a bottle of red or 2 in that video. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor there. And yeah, do tune into Christopher's podcast. It's very good. It'll be quite interesting to hear the German perspective on this UK-EU reset.
Yeah.
It might reveal a little more than Keir Starmer might.
Quite possibly. I think it's always cosy in a podcast environment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think people feel more relaxed. They might say something that they might not on a media interview. I don't know.
Guess we'll find out. Anyway, we've been running a poll of the day, and today we're asking on the government's house building plans. We're asking, do you support Angela Rayner's Green Belts development plan to build 1.5 million homes? And we'll be bringing you the results live throughout the day, so make sure you keep tuning in. The final result being announced in Martin Daubney's show.
Yeah, and I believe it's actually Miriam Cates who's going to be presenting Martin's show today. So you can see all the polls and news and how to vote, etc. on gbnews.com/poll.
And lots more coming up, though, on today's show, including Donald Trump is named Time Person of the Year, and we will be crossing live to New York, where he'll be ringing the stock exchange bell, so don't go anywhere.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
This is a topic very close to my heart. I have become fully convinced that social media, smartphones are one of the primary causes of mental health problems in children and many other serious problems beside. Lots of governments are starting to talk about this, but the Australians are well ahead in their use of legislation. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I've got 3 young children and I'm really concerned about... I mean, they're too young to be on social media, but I'm really concerned about what lies ahead for them. I'm not sure I support what Australia's doing, not because I don't think it's a good idea to ensure that age verification is right. I'm just not sure that the age 16 is appropriate. But that's progress. If we effectively, as I do, accept the point that we need some sort of control, then we can move to a proper debate about whether that's 16, 14, 13, whatever it may be. And, of course, there are age restrictions on things like Facebook. I think, from memory, it is 13.
Yes, but it's a tick box.
But it's a tick box, so all you can do is you can just knock. If you're 11 years old, you can just predate your date of birth by 2 years, and you can get on. I think what Australia is proposing is interesting because it will stop young people, maybe without their parents' knowledge, short-circuiting the system because they're going to be asking for proper age verification and ID. That's definitely something we should do in the UK because it's enforcing the existing law. Query, is 16 the right age, Miriam?
I completely agree with it. It's something I actually said should have been done before. And I think what is good about it is that for a long time, a lot of governments have been saying that the actual social media companies should take more responsibility, but they're not going to because it hurts their bottom line. The most voracious users are younger users. So they will pledge that, oh, I'll put the tick box in, but the kid is the one who's going to actually tick the box. So doing something like this is saying that, OK, we will put in legislation that damages your bottom line, and I think it will force the hand, because they've said it's only 12 months and they will reevaluate it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. It's 2:24. Now, material drawn up by health chiefs in Bradford has described cousin marriages as a cultural practice, and they've likened it to white women choosing to start families later on in life, after the age of 34.
Yes, and meanwhile, the NHS has also been advertising for midwives who specialise in inbred babies.
Yes, this all comes after the Conservative chair, Richard Holden, called for first cousin marriages to be banned due to health concerns.
Well, joining us now is journalist Anna McGovern. Anna, thank you for joining us. What do you make of this on the NHS website?
It is utterly insane. I have never seen something like this in my life, and it is deeply offensive to women as well. The fact that they're comparing marrying your first cousin to the same sort of bracket as a woman over the age of 34 having a child because of liberal values is completely insane. It is proven as well, it is well documented that there are huge, significant medical risks with first cousins having children. The fact that this was even debated in Parliament in the first place, and we also saw an independent MP as well, actually, in Parliament and, advocating for people to go against this and sort of saying, we should support this further. Honestly, I think this is deeply offensive to women, and I think this NHS trust should actually be analysed properly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, working in this business, the news business, you're not shocked by much, but I think even I was quite shocked to read this on this NHS website. I mean, it's so offensive on so many levels. I mean, people have been getting in touch today saying, I had my child at 34, I had my child at 35. It's not the same as having a child out of a first cousin marriage. It's almost as if the website had to say, OK, if we're criticising one cultural practice, we have to criticise, the white women as well. Very, very strange, Anna.
It's completely strange, and I think it also just demonstrates that the NHS is an institution that really needs to be restructured. We've been saying this for so many years now, and the fact that they were allowed and got away with releasing this is utterly insane. I think the medical chiefs who are responsible for this should hang their heads in shame. I think as well with the way the society is set up, women are having less children, and it has become a lot harder, especially with cost of living, tax rises, and I think it is a lot more difficult for women to start those families.
I mean, it absolutely is. Anna, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there because we're running out of time, but Anna McGovern, great to speak to you. You are a journalist and broadcaster.
Right, it is time to cross live now to New York, where President-elect Donald Trump is opening trading on Wall Street.
Yes, there he is. And he's won Time Person of the Year for the second time.
Yes, he has. And of course, Donald Trump has used his image as a successful New York businessman to become a celebrity, reality TV star. Now, of course, eventually president almost for a second time.
They're chanting USA, USA, USA. Oh, there you go. So look at the crowds watching as Donald Trump rings the bell.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of the most visible symbols, according to the Associated Press, of success in the city when somebody is invited to ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. It's symbolic. It's a ceremony of the start of the day of the New York Stock Exchange, and Trump is expected to be on Wall Street, marking this ceremony at the start of the day's trading. And, of course, been named, we believe, Time Person of the Year. As you can see, look at that image, for those of you watching on television, of President-elect Trump posing for the front of that magazine. I think Trump is just speaking to people on the trading floor there rather than delivering any kind of speech.
We're building up the suspense. I believe the bell is going to be rung in about 1 minute. It's going to ring at 2:30 exactly our time. I'm not sure exactly what time that is in New York.
For those of you watching, listening even, on the radio, his wife Melania is stood beside him. I believe I can spot Ivanka Trump there as well, to the right, on the left-hand side of your screens, and other members of his family. Of course, this is perhaps a proud moment for President Trump.
There we go. We've got a round of applause. A round of applause for Donald Trump, Time Person of the Year. I mean, some people would not like Donald Trump to be their Person of the Year, but I mean, you can't deny he's come back from political extinction, some might say, or what people were hoping, some anyway. And now he's back, President of the United States-elect at the moment for the second time.
Yeah.
Quite impressive.
It is quite impressive. It's certainly a notable moment. Of course, born and bred New Yorker himself. And at times treated the stock market as a measure of public approval, perhaps.
We've got 10 seconds, less than that now. Right, they're clapping, the applause is coming. Is that bell going to be rung? That's the question.
This isn't the first time that Trump's been named Time Magazine Person of the Year. He was first named it in 2016, which, of course, was when he was first elected. There he is, ringing the bell.
Oh, it's very American, isn't it? Yeah, a bit of fun, bit of fun.
Yes, Britain has gun carriages. America has a bell.
Yeah, and he just presses the button, right? Well, there you go. Donald Trump ringing the bell, opening trading on Wall Street, named Time Person of the Year. I'm sure he'll be very happy indeed to win that accolade, not once, but twice now. Lots of applause, lots of big smiles, shaking of the hands. A delightful day for Donald Trump. Do you think it's time to go to the headlines now?
I think quite possibly. Tatiana is standing by.
Thank you very much. The top stories this hour. Well, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says questions need to be answered over the awful case of 10-year-old Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her father and stepmother, describing the details as shocking. After years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of her family have now been convicted over her death. Yesterday, Sara's father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were found guilty of her murder. Her uncle, Faisal Malik, was convicted of causing or allowing her death. New findings published a day after Sara's father and stepmother were found guilty show more than 480 children in England were affected by serious incidents between April 2023 and March last year. The Prime Minister says there need to be safeguards for children, especially those who are being homeschooled like Sara.
It's just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who will be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children. It's just the most awful case that many people, many viewers will find very, very, very hard to hear.
In other news, the Prime Minister welcomed European Council President Antonio Costa to Downing Street, saying it was a great privilege. Sir Keir Starmer said there were many things for us to discuss of mutual concern and interest. Sir Keir continues with what he's calling a reset of relations between the EU and the UK. It's the first meeting of its kind since Brexit. And the number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 80% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warned of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. NHS leaders are warning that hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has urged people eligible for free vaccinations on the NHS to take them before it's too late. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More news in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome along to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's grey and misty out there for most of us, damp for some as well, but still some brightness to be had, mostly across parts of Scotland where high pressure is sitting. That high pressure has led to frost and fog in parts of Scotland, but for many away from the foggier areas there is some brightness, particularly north of the Central Belt inland. Otherwise, much of the UK, cloudy skies, and that cloud has lowered across parts of East Wales, the Midlands, eastern England, and that low cloud is bringing outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Otherwise, temperatures of 8 or 9 Celsius in the south. It's not going to feel very pleasant with the grey, misty skies, but colder than that across parts of Scotland after a frosty start. We keep the grey skies into the evening across most of England and Wales. Some cloud breaks for West Wales into western parts of Northern Ireland, for example, but the most extensive cloud breaks will always be through the Highlands and Grampians, Caithness, Sutherland, where, again, temperatures will fall under those clear skies overnight. So frosty conditions and temperatures as low as -8, -9 Celsius in sheltered parts. However, the gap in the cloud across parts of Scotland is being nibbled away from all angles. We've got cloud approaching from the south overnight. We've got cloud approaching from the northwest as well, and that's going to bring outbreaks of rain in. But we start off Friday with a touch of frost in the far northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, another grey start, a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog, and patchy drizzle. The drizzle most likely across southern parts of England and Wales into western and northwestern Scotland, as well as the east coast. And all in all, it's, although technically mild, it's not going to feel very pleasant under the grey skies, turning even milder through the weekend.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Issues in West Wales to the north of Machynlleth. The A487 is currently closed both ways between Minforth and Corris. There's unstable ground there. The diversion is to use the A470 and the A489. London bound, so the M4 eastbound junction 15 to 14 closed. Swindon east to Hungerford, big delays, whilst a spillage of hydraulic fluids dealt with. Both sides of the M25 are shut currently between Romford 29 and Brentwood 28. The anti-clock a congestion back to Lakeside 30, clockwise back to junction 27. There's a police incident. And Kent, the coastbound M26 from the M25 to Rotherham 2A is closed. Long queues back to Godstone at 6 on the M25 following an earlier lorry fire there. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. The time is 2:37 now. If you were here with us just a couple of minutes ago, you would have seen President-elect Trump inside the New York Stock Exchange ringing the bell as he is named Times Person of the Year at the start of the day's
He was looking
trading.
very proud of himself, wasn't he?
He was in his element, I think, and I think he talks about being named Times Person of the Year for a second time just a few moments ago. So this is what he said.
I think we're going to have a tremendous run. We have to straighten out some problems, some big problems in the world. When we left, we didn't have any of these problems. We didn't have Russia with Ukraine. We didn't have Israel October 7th. We didn't have the Afghanistan disaster. We didn't have inflation. We had no inflation. And we had a very strong economy. And we're going to do that again, but I think we're going to even up it because now we have experience.
Well, there you go. Donald Trump tooting his own horn, as he does so well, talking about all his achievements. There we go.
What he
There's
plans to do.
You can tell it's getting near the end of the week. Getting a bit tired. I can't remember my words. Anyway, it is actually Miriam Cates who's going to be standing in for Martin Daubney this afternoon. Miriam, I'm going to catch you on the cuff and ask you: do you think Donald Trump deserves to be the Time Person of the Year? Do we have Miriam?
Don't think she can hear us.
I think Miriam has lost us, but perhaps we'll reconnect. I think he probably does, considering it is quite the achievement to become President of the United States, not once, but twice, and with a gap in the middle.
Yeah, and he was named Time Person of the Year back in 2016, which is around the time, wasn't he? But he was elected back then as well. So I'm sure Trump, and he's speaking in that slot there, or in that little video that we played there about what he perhaps plans to do and his achievements.
Do you know who was Time Person of the Year last year?
Who?
Taylor Swift.
Was she?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a difference.
Well, there you go. And Time Person of the Year the previous year, I can't find who it was in 2022. So if someone could tell me, it was Vladimir Zelensky.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, on Ukraine.
Trump had a very nice presidential portrait on the front cover, perhaps, of the 2024 Time Person of the Year. But there is plenty more still to come on today's show. Including, should we be paying £46 million potentially for a memorial to Queen Elizabeth II? That's next.
It does seem an extraordinary amount of money, £46 million to spend on a memorial, but it is for the late Queen. And leading artists, architects, engineers, they're all being told or encouraged to submit their plans for the project.
Yeah, they are. The memorial will be built in St James's Park, close to Buckingham Palace, and the statues of her parents. And Queen Elizabeth Memorial Committee, the Queen Elizabeth Memorial Committee, say it will be a beautiful place to reflect on an extraordinary life.
OK, well, let's speak with royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams on this one. Richard, £46 million. It does seem an extraordinary large sum.
Well, memorials don't come cheap. And I think that if most would agree with me, if you look at the really great monarchs, we've got Elizabeth I, Victoria, and I would suggest Elizabeth II, and almost everybody, when the designs announced that one, will remember Queen Elizabeth. That's why we've absolutely got to get this right. I mean, yes, it's a lot of money, but I think people will understand why. What I wish is that we had the opportunity, which Edward VII had when he honoured Victoria, to create this gigantic processional avenue from Buckingham Palace to Admiralty Arch with the huge statue of Queen Victoria in the middle as a memorial, something of that sort. We've got it's a limited budget, but nonetheless exciting things should be done with it. And let's bear in mind no disasters, because look at the memorials to Diana. We had a fountain that so frequently didn't work, and then we had a sunken garden with a statue of her looking like a male judo instructor.
And of course, Richard, the late Queen's former private secretary, Lord Jambrin, who's chairman of this committee looking after the plans for these statues, say he wants to attract the finest teams of architects, artists and landscape architects and engineers to create this work. So it is, although a lot of money, an opportunity for British businesses, perhaps, to honour who was the longest reigning monarch in British history.
Yes, absolutely. But also, of course, people, as I say, will be hypersensitive on this issue to make sure that they get it right, that something that has a certain atmosphere, there's a certain sense of community, but also, I suspect, something that is traditional. I mean, there's often, when it comes to memorials, distinct clash between those who like something contemporary because it's they think it's more relevant, and those who are more comfortable with the representational. It would be absolutely fascinating to see how this plays out, and also the politics behind it when we finally know how the choice has been made.
And I hope it's tasteful.
I
hope it's tasteful. You never know with these things what type of monstrosity might emerge, Richard.
Well, no, we won't get a monstrosity with this because, as I say, everyone will remember Queen Elizabeth, and you can imagine the fury, the popular howls of derision if you got anything that wasn't considered.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right, because we have had some dodgy portraits in the past of various monarchs. But Richard Fitzwilliams, we'll leave it there. We can speak again when we see what emerges.
Yes, we will indeed. There's several planning stages. So
I mean, some people are getting in touch to say the King should just pay for it.
Well, the King has to give final approval, so he'll have to give final approval as well as the Prime Minister, to who that's cost.
So not the final cheque.
Not the final cheque. Indeed. Well, there is plenty more still coming up, and Miriam Cates is in for Martin Daubney. Hi, Miriam. What's coming up on today's show?
Well, as you know, Martin's away, so I'm afraid this is a pun-free tease, but we will be discussing, of course, Angela Rayner's housing targets. Is this exactly what Britain needs, or are we in danger of building over our green belt? So that's one very important topic of discussion. We're going to have some fantastic photos of Christmas jumpers, and we're also looking at a case that is in the High Court today about whether or not children can be prescribed cross-sex hormones by private gender clinics. So plenty coming up, lots of guests in the studio, lots of important topics, and please start sending in your Christmas jumper pics.
I'll send in mine, Miriam, for you. I'll send in mine. I came into the studio today with my Christmas jumper on, but apparently I'm not allowed to wear it yet on air. I'll have to save that for Christmas Day. Miriam Cates, thank you very much. Have a fantastic show, 3 till 6. Miriam there in for Martin Daubney.
Yes, and this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more still to come on today's show. The government bans puberty blockers indefinitely for under 18s, claiming the drugs are at a risk to children's health. So, was this the right decision?
Good Afternoon Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Well, it's interesting because I haven't actually been told specifically what I've done, which has resulted in me being removed from my committee position, which was head of daytime. I started a podcast in September in which I interviewed Charlie Bentley-Astor, who's a detransitioner. I then also interviewed Graham Linehan, and I wrote an article for his Substack. And shortly after that, I was told that I had been suspended, and the university union started an investigation into me. And that very quickly became apparent to me that it was an interrogation of my gender-critical views rather than any sort of misconduct that I had been alleged to.
Right.
And Graham Linehan has been outspoken on issues relating to transgenderism, whatever you want to call it, gender ideology. And so perhaps just by having associated yourself with him as a controversial figure, that was why the investigation happened, you suspect?
Yes, and already it's quite clear that guilt by association is a crime that you can commit within university societies. I actually purchased my free speech union membership way before this all happened, when a friend helped me edit the episode with Charlie, and he got in trouble with a separate society who told him that he must disassociate himself from me, and if he didn't, further measures would be taken. So at that point, I thought, wow, I better put some damage control in place and purchase my membership in case anything happens to me.
So this decision is made by the student union, right? Is that made up of fellow students? Or who's making this call?
Well, that's actually part of my appeal. So the process has been completely improper. They haven't followed their own guidelines. There are 2 different guidelines as to whether a complaint is dealt with the society itself, so Leeds Student Radio, or the union, and it's basically been a mishmash of both. So it's been an improper procedure, but it is, as far as I'm aware, it's the student union who's decided to remove me.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. It's 2:47. Now, we bring you very serious news on this channel and the most important debates of the day, of the week, of the month. But today there is a bit of silliness going on in politics. There is a bit of a row over sandwiches. Everyone's trying to get one over on the other. So Kemi Badenoch, in an interview with The Spectator magazine, I believe, said that lunch is for wimps. She said she sometimes has a steak and that sandwiches do not constitute a proper lunch. OK, so then Keir Starmer's spokesperson comes out and says that, no, Keir Starmer thinks that's terrible or whatever, and that he likes a cheese toastie or a tuna sandwich, which is nice. Anyway, Nigel Farage couldn't resist showing everyone his own lunch, so he's dived into this debate. Let's have a look.
The leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, Kemi Badenoch, says that lunch is for wimps. Well, I tell you what, I think that lunch is pretty cool. But on the busy days, I stay in the office and have a sandwich. She even thinks sandwiches are wrong. Now, I leave it up to you, centre-right voters, to decide what kind of leadership you want. Lunch is for wimps or me? Cheers, everybody.
Nigel's just got one up on Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer there.
Classic glass of red, bottle of
red
red
wine. Yeah, absolutely. He knows
What's a
how
bottle
to have
of
a good
red
lunch.
between friends, eh?
Exactly.
Right, we haven't got much time, so let's get to our last story. The government has announced an indefinite ban on puberty blockers for under-18s suffering from gender dysphoria.
Yeah, justifying the ban, the Department of Health and Social Care said that puberty blockers posed an unacceptable safety risk to young people.
OK, here's what Wes Streeting said.
I know it's not easy being a trans kid in our country today. The trans community is at the wrong end of all of the statistics for mental ill health, self-harm and suicide. I can't pretend to know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to feel you have to bury a secret about yourself, to be afraid of who you are, to be bullied for it, and then to experience the liberating experience of coming out.
OK, we're joined now in the studio by human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Peter, thank you for joining us. Wes Streeting spoke there of what many trans children feel and go through, and yet the science and the medical evidence suggests that puberty blockers could be dangerous to children as well. So it's a difficult balance for the government.
Well, the government is saying that puberty blockers are unsafe, but there's no evidence of that. There's never been any clinical trials that show they're unsafe. Moreover, there's a contradiction because the government is saying they're unsafe, but it's saying that young trans people who are already receiving puberty blockers can continue to receive them. Why, if they're unsafe? It's also saying they can be prescribed for clinical trials. Why, if they're unsafe? And it's, for many years, the government has okayed the provision of puberty blockers to non-trans youth who have early onset puberty. Now, in those cases, that early onset puberty with puberty blockers has never shown any adverse consequences whatsoever.
But that's for a different purpose, though. That's for a different purpose.
But it's the same medication.
It's the same medication, but for a very different purpose. And as you say, there hasn't been enough clinical trial, if at all, for how these puberty blockers might affect a child who believes they've been born in a different body. Do you genuinely think that children should be given puberty blockers? Do you think that's a good thing?
Well, there is evidence that they're safe and beneficial from the studies of thousands of trans youth in a dozen different countries across the world. All those studies and reports from clinicians have not produced any evidence
you have to show me the study. This is difficult because we don't have the studies in front of us, but I would trust that if we haven't had clinical trials in this country, that the government should be very careful about it.
Of course,
and have those clinical trials and ban them for now and then see what happens. I mean, I would say that probably a lot of people watching would want them banned entirely for under 18s forevermore. But even so, wait for the clinical trials before you allow children.
Well, we know that clinicians who are experts in dealing with trans youth have been prescribing these puberty blockers safely and securely for many, many years. We know that thousands of trans youth in this country say they've benefited from it.
We also know that there's a lot of children who have autism, for example, who may think that they've been born in the wrong body for a number of different reasons and may well go on to regret taking life-changing medical interventions.
Yeah, but I trust
you also find that there may be children who are same-sex attracted, who think that perhaps life would be easier if they were a girl or a boy or vice versa. Surely people should be over the age of 18 before they take such interventions, if they're going to.
Well, my inclination is to listen to trans young people themselves who've experienced puberty blockers and found them beneficial and safe, but also particularly to listen to the gender identity clinicians, the experts who've been prescribing them with positive effects for many years. Listen to them. It's not for politicians to decide, it's for clinicians. And we have to have strong, compelling evidence to the contrary that they're unsafe before they're banned.
Well, the Health Secretary insists that he has taken this action because it is based on the evidence and advice of clinicians rather than politicians.
Well, it is some clinicians have suggested that they're unsafe, but those clinicians have not produced any evidence or clinical trials to substantiate their claims.
So does that suggest there's disputes within the medical community as to what's right and what's wrong in this instance, or what's safe and what's unsafe?
Well, there is some disagreement, but most gender identity specialists who have expert knowledge of this issue and deal with hundreds or even thousands of trans kids say that they're safe and beneficial. So
Some people would even
listen to
dispute the term trans kid, Peter, but we'll have to talk about that another day. Peter Tatchell, thank you very much indeed. We have come to the end of the show, unfortunately. But that's how it goes.
Yes, and remember, if you are struggling, there is help available.
There is indeed. Thank you for watching Good Afternoon Britain. Thank you very much indeed, Cameron. I think tomorrow I have Charlie Peters with me, so that'll be fun.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update for GB News from the Met Office. Some sunshine out there today, mostly across central parts of Scotland. Generally cloudy elsewhere, with a lot of low cloud, mist and drizzle that's trapped under this area of high pressure and particularly affecting parts of central and eastern UK, with the low cloud having arrived from the North Sea and producing some spells of light rain and drizzle for East Wales, parts of the Midlands, East Anglia, the South East, as well as Northern England. Some drizzle as well for western and northwestern Scotland, but we cling on to some clear spells overnight in the northeast of Scotland, where there will be a touch of frost, but under the blanket of cloud elsewhere, it's going to stay frost-free. We start off Friday with that extensive low cloud across virtually the whole of the country, just some gaps in it across parts of northwest and northeast Scotland. Otherwise, outbreaks of rain increasingly affecting western Scotland, northwest England, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, but some clear spells there for Northern Ireland. England and Wales, mostly, again, a lot of low cloud, mistiness, hill fog about first thing, so a gloomy start, but temperatures around the mid-single figures, so not a particularly frosty start to the day. As we go through the day, little change, although it will turn wetter and windier in the far northwest of Scotland as well as the Northern Isles, and there'll be some light rain across some western coasts, although the rain in the east will tend to ease away. It's a grey day for many places, highs of 5 to 8 Celsius. Now into Friday night, this area of rain will push southeastwards across Scotland, fizzling out and turning more showery as it moves into Northern Ireland and reaches northern